The thing in the pit had already killed the morning's offering, and gaunt keeper Oru could not make himself look at what was left of it. He stood at the rail of the observation gantry, 3 body lengths above the sand, and watched the Blackmane pace. The beast moved the way weather moved, without hurry, without doubt, filling the whole of the Sunder's lower ring with the certainty that it owned every meter of it. Its mane was a black storm around a skull the size of a supply crate. Its hide was slate and old scar. When it turned at the far wall and came back down the length of the pit, the tiered thousands above went quiet in a way no announcer had ever managed to make them quiet, and Oru felt the old cold settle into the ridges of his spine, the cold that every Viharn keeper learned in his first season, or did not live to learn at all. "Fence it back," Oru said into his throat bead. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Full lattice, it's finished." The shock lattice hummed up out of the sand in a curtain of blue light, sectioning the pit, and the Blackmane stopped. It looked at the lattice. It looked past the lattice, up at the gantry, at Oru, with 2 amber eyes that held nothing a keeper wanted to see in a beast. No panic, no fury, only a slow and patient measuring, the look of a thing deciding the order in which it would get to everyone eventually. Then it lay down in the middle of the ruined sand and began, unbothered, to clean the blood from one enormous forepaw. Above Oru, in the warden's box, someone laughed. The sound carried down through the vents. Oru did not have to look to know it was Warden Vasek Threll, because Threll was the only being on Ardu Vex station who laughed when the Blackmane made a kill, and he laughed every single time. 40 years Oru had kept beasts for the Sethric conquered. He had raised bristlehounds from the shell and broken tunnel drakes to the harness, and stood inside the pen of a full-grown reaver cat with nothing but a stun goad and his own steady breathing, and he had the scars to prove all of it, a keeper's map of every mistake he had survived. And in 40 years he had never met an animal he could not read. Fear he could read. Hunger, pain, the wet flat panic of a creature that had decided to die fighting. All of it had a language, and Oru spoke the language, and the language had kept him alive. The Blackmane spoke nothing. That was the horror of it, the thing the tiered crowds paid their marks to feel from a safe distance and could not have named. The beast was not mad. It was not starved into savagery. It killed with the unbothered economy of a creature performing a chore, and then it lay down and cleaned its paw, and it waited, and no keeper in 11 seasons had found a single thread of it to pull. 9 handlers, Oru murmured. He was talking to himself now. The apprentice beside him, a scale-green youngster named Vesh who had been on the gantry all of 2 seasons, pretended not to hear. 9 handlers in the ground, and it never once hurried. "They say it can't be tamed, keeper," Vesh offered. "Everything can be tamed." Oru's tail moved once against the deck plate, slow, or broken, or killed. "That's the whole of my trade, boy, tame, break, or kill." He watched the beast finish its paw and set its huge head down on the sand, eyes still open, still up on the gantry. "This one, I can't do any of the 3, and I've stopped pretending that's an ordinary problem." A chime sounded through the Sunder. The tiered lights dimmed and warmed, the way they did between spectacles, and the announcer's voice rolled out over the pit. The crowd was to disperse to the promenade rings. The day's second offering would be called at the striking of the low bell. Refreshment and wager stations open on levels 4 through 9. Oru barely heard it. He was watching the Blackmane's ear turn. A single slow rotation, tracking something far below the sand. Something down in the service warren where the pens were, where the water lines ran and the feed was mixed, and the indentured stock hands did the labor no free Viharn would touch. The beast's ear turned and held, and for one moment the amber eyes left the gantry entirely and looked down, through the floor of the world, at something Oru could not see. Oru had no word for what he felt then. He would spend a long time afterward trying to find it. The nearest he ever came was this. It was the feeling of standing in a room you have measured 1,000 times and realizing, all at once, that there is a door in it you have never opened, and that the door has been open the whole time, and that something has been coming and going through it while your back was turned. He shook the feeling off. Beasts tracked sounds, that was all. He told Vesh to log the kill and mind the lattice, and he went down the gantry stairs to see about the second offering, and he did not think about the door again until the day it opened. 2 levels below the sand, in the reeking warm dark of the feed warren, Cora Vane was on her knees in a drained trench with her arms in cold water to the elbow, and she was the only living thing on Ardu Vec station who knew the Blackmane's real name. She did not say it. She had not said it aloud in 11 years. But she knew it the way she knew the weight of her own hands, and when the culling horn sounded up above, the low brass note the station rang every time the beast made a kill in the ring. She stopped with her arms in the water and shut her eyes and waited for it to pass, the way you wait out a cramp. Then she went back to clearing the drain. Cora was 22 by the Concord's reckoning, though nobody on the station reckoned it, because nobody on the station counted the years of stock. She was small and plain and brown-haired and quick, with hands gone hard and split from the cold and the lie, and a stock brand on the inside of her left wrist that marked her as property of the Sunder concession, transferable, non-voting, non-personed. She wore the gray coverall of the feed detail, and she kept her head down, and she was very, very good at being invisible, which on Ardu Vec was the only skill that reliably kept a human breathing. There were 40-odd humans in the Sunder's stock warren. They had all come the same way Cora had come. Off the frontier worlds the Sethric Concord had folded into itself in the long, quiet years of its expansion, the little farm colonies at the raw edge of the settled dark, the places too small and too poor to fight and too far out for anyone to miss. The Concord did not, as a rule, kill the humans it took. It found them useful in the way it found any adaptable, uncomplaining animal useful. It put them in the warrens and the mines and the reclamation lines, and it let them breed replacements, and it forgot them, and that was the whole of humanity's place in the great machine of the Concord, beneath notice, below the line where a being was worth a name. Cora knew all of this. She had known it since she was 11. She had learned it on the worst day of her life, and she had built the rest of her life on top of that knowledge like a house on cold stone, and she had made herself small and quick and invisible and useful, and she had spent 11 years working her way, one transfer and one favor and one uncomplaining season at a time, from a reclamation barge at the ascent of the Concord all the way inward to Ardu Vec station, to the Sunder, to the feed warren 2 levels beneath the sand. Because that was where they kept him. She had not planned to survive the getting here. She had planned only to get here. She had a plan for after, too, but it was not a plan a sensible person would have made, and she had never once let herself look at it straight on, because if she looked at it straight on she was afraid she would lose her nerve, and she had come too far to lose her nerve now. Vane, the foreman's voice came down the warren. He was a squat, sour Viharn named Duck who ran the feed detail and disliked humans the way some beings disliked cold, reflexively, without heat, as a settled fact of the world. Vane, the drain. Clear Keeper, Cora said, not looking up. She had learned to call all of them Keeper. It cost nothing and it kept the goad off her back. Not the drain. Leave the drain. Duck came down the gangway and stood over the trench, and something in his voice made Cora look up after all. He was not angry. Duck was always a little angry. This was different. He looked, she realized, pleased, and a pleased duck was a rare and dangerous thing. You're wanted topside, feed cart to the low ring, the offering short a hand. Cora went still with her arms still in the water. The low ring, the sand where they ran the beasts. Stock did not go topside. That was the whole architecture of the station. The free Viharn moved above, the stock moved below, and the two did not mix, because the crowds paid to see beasts kill beasts and prisoners, not to see the gray drudge of the warren that fed them. In 11 years and 4 stations, Cora had never once been called up to the sand. The feed carts to the ring were run by beast detail, by trained keepers with goads and shock lattices, not by drain hands. "The offering's short a hand," Duck said again, and now the pleasure in it was unmistakable, and Cora understood. She understood all at once, the way you understand a drop when your foot has already gone over the edge. There was a second spectacle at the low bell. There was an offering. Offerings were what the conquered fed to the beasts it could not otherwise entertain: condemned prisoners, broken stock, whatever the concession had that it wanted rid of and could dress up as a show. The offering was short a hand because the offering was her. She got her arms out of the water. She stood, her legs held, which surprised her. Duck was watching her face for the thing he wanted to see there, the drain of blood, the animal understanding, and Cora gave him nothing, because giving them nothing was the oldest habit she had, older than the brand on her wrist. She dried her hands slowly on her coverall. "Which beast?" she said, flat, just information. Duck's mouthparts moved in what passed on a V-horn for a grin. "The prize," he said. "The warden asked for a human special. Said the crowd's grown bored of drakes and thieves. Said there's a rich comedy in it, a soft little frontier animal walking out to meet the hardest thing in the galaxy." He turned to go and threw the rest back over his shoulder, careless, a man delivering a joke he found genuinely funny. "It's the Blackmane vein. You're for the Blackmane." He expected her to break then. He waited for it, half-turned, savoring. Cora picked up her drain rake, set it neatly against the trench wall where it belonged, and said, "I'll need to wash my hands properly first. There's lye on them. He won't like the smell." Duck's grin faltered. He did not know what to do with that. He had rattled 40 years of stock, and they had all done the thing they were supposed to do, and this small brown human had said he won't like the smell, as if she were being sent to serve at table. Duck repeated. "The beast," Cora said. "Which way to the water?" Warden Vasek Threll owned the finest view on Ardu Vec Station, and he was in a foul mood inside it. His box hung out over the low ring on a cantilever of black glass, so that a guest standing at its lip could look straight down the throat of the sunder to the sand, to the beasts, to the whole machinery of the conquered's favorite pleasure. Threll had furnished it the way successful Viharn furnished everything, with expensive restraint dark stone, a rack of trophy scoots from the beasts he had run and ruined over the years, a long low table where the true business of the sunder got done, which was not spectacle but leverage. Threll did not, at heart, care about beasts. He cared about the fear beasts produced, and he cared about selling that fear to Viharn who needed it. To rivals he wished to remind of their place, to conquered prefects who paid handsomely for the sunder to demonstrate, again and again, in front of the right witnesses, exactly what the conquered did to things that displeased it. The Blackmane was the finest instrument of fear the conquered had ever caged, and it had made Threll richer than his father's whole line, and Threll hated it with a purity he found almost restful. "It looked at me again," he said. Across the low table, his broker, a lean, gray Viharn called Sethin, who handled the wager lines in the private contracts and never, ever laughed at the wrong time, inclined her head a careful degree. "Beasts look, Warden." "It looks at me the way I look at meat." Threll turned from the glass. 11 seasons I have owned that animal, and it has never once been mine. Do you understand the problem with that, Sethin? A weapon that is not yours is not a weapon. It is a debt with teeth. This was the true trouble, and Threll turned it over as he had turned it over for months. The conquered loved the Blackmane, and the conquered's love was worth a fortune. But the conquered's love was also a leash on Threll himself, because a prefect who could buy an afternoon of the Blackmane's terror could just as easily decide he would prefer to own the beast outright, and there was nothing Threll could do to stop him. He owned a thing he could not control, which meant that anyone stronger than Threll owned Threll. The whole beautiful cantilever of his fortune hung out over that single crack. And so Threll had begun, quietly, to plan the Blackmane's ending. Not soon, not cheaply. He would wring one last great season of marks out of the beast, One long humiliation of everything the crowds could be made to fear, and then he would stage its death as the grandest spectacle Arduvek had ever seen, and he would sell the ending at a price that made the beast's whole life look like a down payment. A weapon you cannot own, you spend. That was the philosophy. That was why, this morning, he had sent down to the Warren for something new. A human, Sethan said, reading the day sheet. She did not approve. Threll could hear it in the flatness of her voice, and he enjoyed it. You're feeding it a human. I am feeding it comedy, Threll corrected. The crowds are jaded, Sethan. They have watched it break drakes and reavers and the finest condemned killers the conquered could ship us, and they have grown used to the size of it. Fear needs contrast to breathe. So, he spread his foreclaws, presenting the elegance of it. The hardest thing in the galaxy and the softest, a frontier drudge. A little brown farm animal that has never held a weapon, sent out onto the sand with nothing at all, to be undone in front of 40,000 witnesses in the time it takes to draw breath. They will feel the size of the beast again through the smallness of the prey. And every prefect in that crowd will go home remembering, very clearly, what the conquered does to soft things that wander too far in. Sethan was quiet a moment. And if the human runs, screams, it's poor theater warden a thing that only screams. They always run. Threll returned to the glass, to the black beast lying in the ruined sand 200 meters below, and the old restful hatred moved in him, warm as a swallow of spirit. They always run, and it never hurries, and that Sethan is the finest thing my animal does. It lets them run. It gives them the whole length of the sand to hope in. And then it collects them without haste in front of everyone, and the crowd learns the lesson all over again. He watched the beast. The beast far below had lifted its head and turned its ear down toward the Warren, toward the service lifts, toward something coming up through the floor of the world. There is no hope, Threll said softly to the glass, to himself, well pleased. That's the whole of the show. There is no hope, and it takes its time proving it. Below him the low bell struck. They brought her up in a stock lift that smelled of rust and old fear, and at the top of it, in the staging pen beneath the sand, Gaunt Keeper Oru was waiting, and he was not pleased. Oru had run offerings for the Sunder for a long time, and he did not enjoy them, and he had learned to do them cleanly and think about them as little as possible. Condemned killers he could stomach, the Conquered's courts were not gentle, but the beings they sent to the sand had at least done things. This was different. Threll had sent down for a drudge. Oru had seen the manifest. Feed detail, drain hand, non-person stock, a human, and Oru's whole 40 years leaned against the wrongness of it, because you did not feed the Blackmane a thing that could not even make it interesting. It was waste. Oru hated waste in his pens the way a smith hates a cracked bell. Then the lift opened and the human stepped out, and Oru forgot for a moment to be angry. She was small, as he'd expected, and plain and brown in the gray of the feed warren, with the split hands of the Lidatails and a stock brand on her wrist. She was exactly what the manifest said she was. What the manifest did not say, what no manifest could say, was how she held herself. Oru had walked 500 beings out to the sand across the seasons, killers and cowards and the merely unlucky, and every one of them, every single one, had carried the sand in their body before they ever reached it. It came off them like a smell. The shoulders drew up. The breath went high and quick. The eyes went to the exits, to the walls, to the sky, hunting the impossible way out. This human's shoulders were down. Her breathing was slow. She looked around the staging pen once calmly, the way a keeper looks around a pen, marking the gates and the lattice posts and the height of the walls, and then she looked at Oru, and she said in level, Warren-accented Conquered trade speech, "You're the keeper." "I am the keeper," Oru said, before he had decided to answer her at all. "Gaunt Keeper Oru," she said, "the one they call the Old Hand. The others in the Warren talk about you. They say you're the only keeper here who doesn't use the goad more than he has to." She said it without flattery, as a plain accounting, and then she nodded once, as if this settled some private question. "Good. Then you'll understand what I'm about to ask you, and you won't waste our time being afraid of it." Oru's apprentice Vesh behind him made a small strangled sound. Stock did not speak to keepers this way. Stock did not speak to keepers at all, beyond keeper and clear and yes. Oru held up a foreclaw to silence the boy without looking at him. Ask, Oru said. When you send me out, the human said, don't run the lattice, don't run the goads. Whatever you've got in the wings to make the beast perform, the sound lances, the burn prods, whatever the warden likes, leave them cold. Not for my sake. She met his eyes, and hers were steady, brown, and unhurried, and Oru felt the small, cold sensation of a keeper who has walked into a pen expecting one animal and found another. For his. He spent 11 years being hurt by everything that comes near him. If the first thing that walks out onto that sand today is one more machine trying to hurt him, this goes very badly for everyone in this building. If it's just me, and my hands are empty, and nobody touches him, then it doesn't. Oru looked at her for a long moment. Above them, muffled, the tiered thousands were filling the sunder for the second spectacle, and the announcer's voice was rolling out its patter, and somewhere in his box Warden Threll was pouring something expensive and waiting to be entertained. You know the beast, Oru said. It was not a question. He had spent his whole life reading the thing in front of him, and the thing in front of him was reading back, and the two of them stood in the staging pen and understood one another in the plain, wordless way of two people in the same trade. I knew him, Cora said, before he was a beast. She turned toward the great inner gate, the one that opened onto the sand and the culling lights beyond it, and the sound of 40,000 Viharn who had come to watch her die. Leave the goads cold, keeper, please. And whatever you see out there, don't send anyone in after me. Nobody goes near him but me. That's the only way anyone comes out of that pit alive today, including him. Oru did not run the goads. He told himself afterward a great many practical reasons why. That the manifest was waste anyway. That a keeper trusts his read of a thing, and his read of this human overrode 40 years of protocol. That he was old and tired, and some part of him wanted, just once, to see what happened when you did not reach for the goad. All of it was true, and none of it was the reason. The reason was that, when she said before he was a beast, something turned over in Oru's chest that had been sleeping his whole life. The same something that had turned over on the gantry that morning, when the Blackmane's ear tracked down through the floor of the world. The sense of a door standing open that he had never seen. He keyed the inner gate. The culling lights blazed. And Gauntkeeper Oru broke every protocol of his trade, and sent a small, plain, empty-handed human walking out onto the sand to meet the hardest thing in the galaxy, with the goads cold and the lattice down, and his own old heart in his throat. The gate ground open and the noise hit Cora like a wall, 40,000 voices, the culling horns, the vast bright roar of the sunder, and then she was through it and out onto the sand, and the gate ground shut behind her, and the noise did a strange thing. It receded, not because it stopped, because Cora stopped listening to it. She had spent 11 years learning to put a wall between herself and everything that wanted to break her, and she put the wall up now. And behind the wall the roar of the sunder became a far-off weather, and there was only the sand, warm through her worn boots, and the great black shape at the center of it, rising to its feet. The Blackmane stood, and 40,000 Viharn drew one breath together and held it. It was bigger than the stories. Cora had seen him from a distance twice in the 11 years of working toward this, both times through a service grill, both times for the length of a heartbeat, and both times she had told herself it was him and had not fully believed it, because the cub she had known would fit in a feed basket, and this was the size of a grain hauler. This was a thing that blotted out the culling lights when it turned. Its mane hung in black cords to the sand. Its eyes came up and found her, and they were amber, still amber, the exact amber she had fallen asleep looking into on the coldest nights of a childhood that had ended 11 years ago, and Cora's chest cracked straight down the middle, and she kept walking. The crowd expected her to run. She could feel the shape of their expectation, the way you feel a held breath. The whole spectacle Threll had built was a spectacle of running, the small soft thing bolting for a wall that had no door, the beast collecting it without haste. Cora did not run. She walked, at an even unhurried pace, straight down the center of the sand toward the animal that had killed 9 keepers, and she kept her hands loose and open at her sides where he could see them and see they were empty, and when she was close enough that his lowered head was above her own, close enough to smell the hot iron reek of him and the old blood mat of his mane, she stopped. The Sunder had gone utterly silent. Even Threll in his glass box had set down his glass. Cora looked up into the amber eyes. The beast looked down. Its breath came out of it in a low rolling furnace sound she could feel in her sternum, and its lips had drawn back off teeth as long as her forearm, and every instinct a body owns was screaming at her to be anywhere else in the galaxy, and she stood in it, and she let it read her, the way Oru had let her read him, the way she had spent 11 years in 4 stations and a whole ruined life getting here to do. Then she said the name, quietly, just for him, the first time she had said it aloud in 11 years. Hello, Barley. For one heartbeat nothing moved. Then the hardest thing in the galaxy folded its front legs beneath it, and lowered its great black head, and lay down in the sand in front of the small human girl. Not the crouch of a beast about to spring. Every keeper in the building knew the difference and not one of them could breathe, but low and flat and still. Its enormous skull sinking until its jaw rested against the sand at her feet, and its amber eyes rolled up to look at her the way a dog looks up at the one door it has waited its whole life to see open. The Blackmane beast that the whole galaxy feared bowed. And into the silence of 40,000 held breaths, a single sound broke, a raw, cracked, hitching sound that took Warden Threll a long moment to identify, because he had never once, in 11 seasons of owning the beast, heard anything like it come off the sand. It was the human. She had gone down onto her knees in front of the beast and put her split, lie-burned hands on either side of that vast black skull and pressed her forehead to the ridge of its brow, and she was weeping not in fear. Anyone could see it was not fear. She was weeping the way a person weeps who has finally, after too long, set down something they have carried alone for a very long way. There you are, she was saying over and over into the Blackmane, too quiet for the crowd but not too quiet for the beast, whose whole enormous body had begun impossibly to tremble like a struck bell. There you are, I found you, I told you I'd find you, there you are. In the warden's box, Vasek Threll stood very still and watched 40,000 marks of certainty come apart in front of him. It was not that the beast had failed to kill. Threll's mind was already 3 moves past that, already reaching for the recovery. It was the shape of what had happened, the specific and catastrophic shape of it. His instrument of pure and reliable terror, the thing prefects paid to feel, the thing that made rivals go pale and quiet at his table, had just, in front of the entire assembled elite of Arduvek, lain down and put its face in the dirt for a piece of non-personed frontier stock. Every witness in that crowd had come to be reminded that the conquered's hardest thing broke everything soft that came near it. And they had watched the hardest thing in the galaxy weep at the feet of the softest, and they would remember it, and they would tell it, and the telling would not stop. Get her off the sand, Threll said. Sethan was already at the box's control lectern, fingers moving. The extraction team's staging, Warden, but the beast is between the human and every gate. If we send keepers in. I did not ask for the difficulties. Get her off the sand. Threll's voice did not rise, it never rose, that was one of the disciplines that had made him. But Sethan had worked the wager lines beside him for 19 years, and she heard under the flatness a thing she had never heard in him before, and it made the gray scales of her nape draw tight. She heard fear. Before she says another word, Threll said, and before one more of those prefects works out what he's looking at. Because Threll had already worked out what he was looking at. He was a man who traded in fear for a living, and so he understood, better than any beastkeeper in the building, the exact nature of the thing that had just changed. Fear was a currency, and its whole value depended on being universal, on the beast breaking everyone, without exception, without mercy, without a door. A weapon that broke everyone was terror. A weapon that broke everyone except one small human who could walk up and put her hands on its face was not terror at all. It was a lock, and it had just, in front of 40,000 witnesses, revealed that it had a key. And whoever held the key held the weapon. Threll looked down at the sand, at the small brown human kneeling in the Blackmane with her forehead pressed to the beast's brow. And for the first time in 11 seasons, the Blackmane was the second most important living thing in his arena. "No," he said slowly, as the recovery assembled itself in his mind, cold and clean and complete. "No, belay the extraction. Don't send anyone in." He turned from the glass. "Get me the keeper, the old one, Gaunt Keeper Oro. A weapon you cannot own, you spend," he had told himself for months. But that was the philosophy for a weapon with no key. A weapon with a key was a different proposition entirely. You did not spend it. You took the key, and you kept the key somewhere the key could not run, and then, for the first time, the weapon was truly and completely yours. "And find out everything there is to know," Threll said, "about that human." Down on the sand, Cora was not thinking about Threll, or the crowd, or the gates, or the very long odds against any of them living out the hour. She was thinking about a barn. It came back to her all at once, the way the past comes back when a body finally stops holding it off, not as a story with a beginning, but as a smell and a temperature and the specific dark of a place. The barn on Elsby's Rest had smelled of cut fodder and animal warmth, and the particular mineral cold of a frontier world's long nights, and it had been the warmest place on the homestead. And Cora had been 11 years old and small for 11, and she had found the cub there, in the last stall, 3 days after the Concord's culling drones had swept the high pasture and killed everything larger than a fodder hen, for the safety of the settlement. They had killed the Vashak that denned in the ridge above the Vane homestead. Cora's father had warned them not to. The ridge Vashak had never come down, had never touched the stock, had kept the smaller predators off the high pasture for 3 winters running. An old truce nobody had spoken aloud, but everyone on the rest had honored. The Concord did not honor truces with animals. The Concord catalogued and assessed, and where its catalog found an apex predator within range of a settlement, the catalog prescribed a culling, and the drones came and did the culling and went away again, and nobody in the whole vast machine ever knew or cared that they had left one thing alive. A black cub, the size of a feed basket, that had followed the smell of warmth down off the cold ridge and into the last stall of the Vane barn and lain down in the fodder to die. Cora had not let it die. That was the whole of it, really. She had been 11, and she had lost enough of her world to the drones already that winter, and she had knelt down in the fodder in front of a thing that could have taken her hand off, and she had not been afraid of it, because she had used up all her fear on the drones and had none left over, and the cub had smelled the lysope her mother made in the barn and the fodder and no fear at all, and it had let her stay. She had fed it on stolen milk, and when it grew past milk, on scraps, and when it grew past scraps, on whole hindquarters of fodder beast that she smuggled out of the smokehouse, and lied about to her father with a straight face for a year and a half. She had named it barley, after the pale winter grain, though the cub was black as a cellar, because a girl of 11 names a thing for the joke of it, and the joke had made her laugh in a winter with very little laughing in it. And it had grown. That was the thing about a Vashak. Her father had known it, had watched the cub past the point where any of them could pretend it was staying a cub, and had said, in the flat, tired way of a frontier man who has already lost too much to argue with, that a day was coming when the barn would not hold it and the truce would not hold either, and that on that day Cora would have to take it up the ridge and let it go back to the cold and be what it was. Cora had known he was right. She had been 13 by then, and Barley had stood taller than the fodder beasts, and he slept curled around her in the last stall like a black hill, and she had known her father was right, and she had been getting ready, in her slow, stubborn 13-year-old way, to do the hardest thing she had ever done and take her friend up the ridge and give him back to the world. The conquered specimen frigate came down out of the winter sky before she got the chance. They had not come for barley. That was a thing Cora had made herself understand over the 11 years, because understanding it was the only way to keep the hate from eating her hollow. The frigate had come on a survey sweep, a routine cataloging of a frontier world the conquered was folding into itself, and its scan drones had found a full-grown Vashak living inside a human settlement. A thing the conquered's catalog had no box for, a thing so anomalous that a bored specimen officer had flagged it upward, and someone upward had said acquire. They had come for a curiosity. They had put a containment field around the barn and gassed it, and Cora had woken up on the cold ground of the yard with her family in restraints, and the barn empty and the specimen frigate already a bright point climbing out of the winter sky, taking barley with it up into the dark, to whatever the conquered did with the curiosities it acquired. She had been 13. She had spent the next 9 years finding out what the conquered did with them, and then she had spent the last 2 years getting to Arduvek. That was the whole of it. That was the story the crowd could not hear and Threll could not fathom and Oru had felt the edge of when she said before he was a beast. There was no mystery in it. There was no destiny, no ancient bond of blood, no apex recognizing apex across the gulf of the stars. There was only a girl who had not been afraid of a dying cub, and had fed it and named it Barley, and had every intention of coming back for it, and had spent 11 years keeping that intention like a coal in a cold hand, and a cub that had never, in 11 years of being hurt by everything the galaxy sent at it, forgotten the one warm thing in a cold winter, the one hand that had never once come at it with a goad. The galaxy had made a legend out of the not forgetting. The galaxy had called it apex and mystery and the unkillable dark. It was only ever a boy who missed his friend. "Come on," Cora murmured into the Blackmane. The beast's trembling had eased under her hands. Its enormous flank rose and fell against her slow, and its amber eye stayed on her, and the whole animal had gone soft in a way that 11 years of keepers with 11 years of goads had never once managed to make it go. "Come on, Barley, up. We can't stay out here. Up now, with me." And the Blackmane rose and put itself between her and the culling lights, and walked her off the sand. Getting them off the sand took gaunt keeper Oru the hardest 90 minutes of his 40-year career, and by the end of it he understood that his career, as he had known it, was over, and that a stranger one had begun. He met them at the inner gate. He did it against every protocol, against Vesh's white-knuckled objections, against the shrilling of the extraction team lead over the throat bead. And he did it because he had watched the whole thing from the gantry, and he had understood, with the cold clarity of a man watching the ground of his life shift, that the extraction team would get everyone killed, and the human would not. So Oru keyed the inner gate himself, and stood in the open mouth of it, alone, with his goad slung and his hands loose, and open at his sides the way he had watched the human hold hers, and he waited. The beast came off the sand with the human's hand in its mane, and it saw Oru in the gate, and it stopped. The furnace sound came up out of it. Its head lowered, not the bow this time, the other thing, the flattening that meant a keeper's death, and Oru had seen that flattening take 9 of his colleagues, and he stood in it and did not reach for the goad. "Easy," Cora said, not to Oru, to the beast. Her hand moved in the Blackmane. "Easy, Barley, he left the goads cold. He's the one who let me come to you. He's a friend." And then to Oru, without turning her head, in the same low, even voice, "Don't look him in the eye and don't show him your teeth. Look at the ground by his feet. Let him smell your hands. He'll know you're not carrying." Oru, 40 years a keeper, took instruction from a piece of frontier stock in the gate of his own arena, and lowered his eyes to the sand by the beast's forefeet, and turned his empty hands palm out, and stood there while the hardest thing in the galaxy lowered its vast black head and breathed in the smell of him, One long furnace breath that stirred the loose scales along his forearms and stank of iron and old blood. And the flattening eased, the great head came up. The beast looked at Oru a moment longer, incurious now. Having filed him under some category Oru would have given a season's wage to understand. And then it dismissed him and turned its whole attention back to the human. And Oru let out a breath he had been holding, he thought, for about 40 years. "That's the trick of it then," he said quietly, as he walked them down through the service warren toward the deep pens, the beast pacing between him and the human, matching her stride, its mane brushing the low ceiling. Empty hands, no teeth, no eyes. "That's not the trick of it." Cora's hand stayed in the mane. She looked tired now, in the aftermath, the way a person looks when a thing they braced against their whole body has finally arrived. "The trick of it is 11 years. You can't shortcut it, Keeper. Don't let anyone tell you you can. He's not gentle because I hold my hands right. He's gentle because I fed him when he was starving and small and I never once hurt him and he remembers." She glanced at Oru and there was something almost like pity in it. "You can copy how I stand. It won't do you any good. There's no how. There's only who." Oru said nothing for a while. The warren rolled past them, gray and warm and reeking. Behind them, muffled, the sunder was emptying, 40,000 Viharn carrying home the thing they had seen. Ahead lay the deep pens and whatever came next, and Oru, who had spent his life learning the language of animals, walked beside the one animal that had never had a language for him, and understood, finally, that he had been wrong his whole life about what he was looking at. "I have kept beasts for 40 years, he said at last. "I thought there was tame and there was broken and there was killed and nothing else." He watched the black shoulder roll beside him, the size of a hauler, the amber eye tracking the human's every step. "There was a fourth thing the whole time, and I never once saw it because the conquered doesn't put it in the catalog." "What's the fourth thing?" Cora said. "Loved," said Gauntkeeper Oru. "The beast is loved and it loves back. And your conquered has spent 11 years and a fortune trying to break something it never once understood it was looking at." He stopped at the deep pen gate and keyed it and looked at the small brown human and the great black beast, and the last of his 40-year career fell quietly away from him, and he found he did not miss it. "They're going to want to own that, you know. Threll, the prefects, they've seen the key now. They're going to want to own you the way they own him, and they're going to think it's the same thing and it isn't, and that misunderstanding is going to get people killed." He held her eyes. "So I'll ask you the Keeper's question, Stock, because somebody has to. What's your plan?" Cora looked at Barley. Barley looked at Cora. "I came here to take him home," she said simply. "That was always the plan. There isn't a second half to it. I get him out and I take him back to the cold where he can be what he is, and I let him go the way I meant to before they came." Her jaw set, and for the first time Oru saw the stubbornness under the calm, the thing that had carried a girl across 9 years and 4 stations on nothing but a coal in a cold hand. "I know how it sounds. I know there's no way off this station for Stock, and there's no way off it for him, and the whole galaxy would have to move to let it happen." She put her forehead against the Blackmane briefly, the way a person touches a doorframe on the way out. "I know. I've known for 11 years. I'm doing it anyway." Oru looked at her a long moment. Then, to his own considerable surprise, the old keeper heard himself say, "Then you'll want to know how the pens are watched, and where the drone frigates dock, and which of the Deepwarren locks still run on the old mechanical override that Threll's never paid to replace." He turned into the pen, gruff, not looking at her, an old man who had just chosen a side after 40 years of not choosing. "Bring the beast. I'll show you where the water is, and stop calling me Keeper. My name is Oru." By the second day, the Sunder had a new problem, and it did not know how to say the problem out loud. The problem was that the Blackmane would no longer perform. Threll had ordered a spectacle for the low bell, a face-saving demonstration, a routing of a shipment of tunnel drakes, the beast reminding the crowd of what it was, and the beast had refused. Not raged. Refused. It had lain down in its pen with its back to the gate and would not rise, and no goad, no sound lance, no burn prod, nothing in the whole keeper's arsenal that had driven it out onto the sand for 11 seasons, could move it. The extraction lead had lost a handspan of scale to it and was lucky to keep the arm. The pen keepers would no longer go near it. The beast lay with its back to the world and waited, and the only thing in the galaxy it would rise for was a small brown human who was, on the manifest, still the property of the feed detail. Threll understood the shape of it faster than his keepers did. The beast had spent 11 years enduring the goad because enduring was all it had. Now it had something else. Now it had her. And a thing that has something to protect does not endure the goad any longer than it has to. It lies down and it waits, and it saves itself for the one thing worth rising for, and the goad becomes, overnight, worthless. So we use her, Threll said. He was at the long, low table, and across it sat the gray broker Sethan and the flag lieutenant of the prefect's guard, a heavy old Viharn named Drius Korin, who commanded the conquered garrison on Ardu Vec, and had come, personally, to see about the rumor that had emptied out of the Sunder and spread across the station in a single night. The beast rises for the human. Very well. We put the human on the sand, we run the show, the beast performs to keep her near, everyone goes home reminded of what my animal is, and the awkward business of the last 2 days becomes a footnote. The awkward business of the last 2 days, said Drius Korin, is on every deck of this station by now, Warden. The old soldier had the flat, unbothered manner of a being who had long ago stopped being impressed by rich men's furniture. My garrison's talking about it. The service tiers are talking about it. There's a version going around the lower decks where the beast is some kind of frontier god and the human girl is its prophet. My people find it funny. That's the trouble. It used to be nobody laughed about the Blackmane. Now they're laughing. He leaned back. The prefect's going to hear of it if he hasn't. And when the prefect hears his most reliable instrument of terror has become a joke, he's not going to want it spent, Threll. He's going to want it fixed. And if you can't fix it, the old soldier let it hang, without malice, a man simply reading out the weather, he's going to send someone who can, and that someone won't be you. Threll kept his face still. Under the table, out of sight, one foreclaw pressed hard against his own knee. Drius Korin had, in his blunt garrison way, just laid out the whole of Threll's fear on the table like a hand of cards. The beast was no longer terror. It was becoming comedy. And comedy in the conquered was the one thing a man in Threll's position could not survive, because the conquered ran on fear. And a man who could no longer produce fear was not feared himself, and a man who was not feared was finished. Then we don't fix the beast, Threll said slowly, and the recovery came to him whole, cold and clean and complete, the way the best of them did. We fix the meaning of it. He rose and went to the black glass and looked down at the empty sand. Right now the story is that the beast bowed to the human, that the human is stronger than the Blackmane. That's the story that's funny. That's the story that's dangerous. So we changed the story. He turned back to the table, and there was something almost pleasant in his face now, the pleasure of a trap coming true. We don't hide the human. We make the human ours. We give her quarters and a keeper's rank, and we put it about that the conquered has elevated a clever piece of frontier stock to master its greatest weapon, that the bond was the conquered's design all along, the final refinement of 11 seasons' work. The beast doesn't obey a stronger thing than the conquered. The beast obeys the conquered's chosen handler. He spread his claws. And then it isn't comedy, it's mastery. The Blackmane is more terrifying than ever because now it's a weapon that can be aimed. And the human, his voice did not change at all. The human belongs to me. And she does as she's told, because the alternative is that the beast she crossed the galaxy for goes back to the goad, and she knows it. And she'll spend the rest of her life keeping it calm and pointed wherever I point it. The key stays in the lock, and the lock is mine. Sethan was quiet. Then she said carefully, and if the human won't be elevated. Threll smiled. Everyone can be elevated, Sethan. It's only a question of what you put underneath them to make them climb. He looked at Drius Corin. You said the lower decks are calling her a prophet. Good. A prophet with 40 other humans in a warren she grew up protecting. A prophet who spent her whole life keeping soft things alive. He turned back to the glass. Bring her up. Give her the good quarters. Feed her at my table. And make very sure she understands before we ever ask her for anything exactly how many soft things there are on this station that a displeased warden could make hard. They gave Cora a room with a bed in it, and a window, and a door that locked from the inside, and Cora understood every one of these things for exactly what it was. She had been 3 days in the deep pens with Barley, sleeping against the great warm flank the way she had slept in the last stall of the barn 11 years and a whole life ago, and Oru had brought her food and told her, in gruff installments, how the station worked, where the frigates docked, which locks ran on the old override, how many of the garrison stood the night watch on the pen level and how bored they were. And then on the 4th day the guards had come, polite guards, garrison guards under old Drius Corin himself, and they had not put restraints on her, which frightened Cora more than restraints would have, and they had brought her up to a warm room with a window and told her the warden requested the honor of her company at the low meal. The window looked out over the promenade rings, down the great bright throat of Arduvek, at more Viharn than Cora had seen in her whole life, moving through more wealth than her whole homeworld had held. And Cora stood at it, and understood that she had walked out of one cage and been walked into a finer one, and that the finer one was more dangerous, because the bars of it were made of kindness, and kindness was the one tool the conquered had never once used on her, and she did not yet know how to break a bar she couldn't see. He'll offer you a place, Oru had warned her the last night in the pens low so the pen mics wouldn't carry it. Threll, he's too clever to threaten you first. He'll offer a rank, a room, a life, everything you never had, all of it real, all of it yours, and all you have to do to keep it is keep the beast calm and pointed where he points it. And you'll want to say no, and you'll be right to want to. But listen to me, Stock Cora, listen. Don't say no to his face. Not the first time. A man like Threll can survive being refused. He cannot survive being made a fool of twice in one season. If you shame him in front of his own table, he stops being a man protecting a fortune and becomes a man protecting his pride, and there is nothing in the galaxy more dangerous than a proud man with a garrison. The old keeper had held her eyes. Buy time, bow your head, let him think the key is turning. And use the time to get the two of you off this station, before he works out that it isn't. So when the guards came back for her at the striking of the low bell, Cora bowed her head, and let them lead her up through the bright tiers to the black glass box that hung out over the sand, and she made herself small and quick, and invisible the way she had made herself for 11 years, and she went in to take a meal at the table of the man who intended to own her. The table was longer than the barn on Elspie's Rest had been wide, and there was food on it that Cora had no names for, and Warden Vasek Threll rose when she came in as if she were a person. That was the first thing that told her how much danger she was in. In 11 years, no Viharn had ever risen for her. The stock details rose for the keepers rose for the free rose for rank. Nobody rose for a human. Threll rose and smiled and gestured her to a seat at his own right hand and said, Mistress Vane, I hope the quarters suit you. If anything's wanting, you've only to say you're not stock here. Not any more. Sit. Eat. You've had 11 hard years, I understand. That's finished now. Cora sat. She did not eat. She put her split, lie-burned hands in her lap where the fine cloth of the table couldn't shame them, and she kept her head a careful degree lowered, and she watched the warden the way she had watched Barley through the service grill, marking the exits, the height of the walls, the shape of the thing in front of her. You know what I am, Cora said. You know what I did, so you know I didn't cross the galaxy for quarters. I know exactly what you did, Threll agreed, warmly settling back. You performed a miracle, Mistress Vane. 11 seasons, a fortune, the finest keepers the conquered could hire, every instrument of correction ever devised, and none of us could put a hand on that animal without losing it. You walked out with empty hands and it lay down in the dirt for you. He lifted a glass of something pale and let the culling lights move in it. Do you have any idea what that's worth? Not to me. To the conquered. A weapon that breaks everything is a fine thing to own, but it's a blunt thing. You pointed at a room and everything in the room dies, friend and enemy alike, and so you can only ever use it as a threat, never as an instrument. But a weapon that breaks everything except the hand that holds it. His eyes came up, and they were not warm at all, whatever his voice was doing. That is the most valuable thing in the settled dark. That is an aimed apocalypse, and you, Mistress Vane, are the hand. There it was. Cora had known it was coming, and it still went through her cold. She kept her head lowered. You want me to keep him calm, she said, and pointed where you point him. I want to give you a life, Threll said. Rank this room. Your own name on the manifest instead of a concession brand. Every one of the 11 years the conquered took from you, given back with interest for the rest of a long and comfortable life. All you'd have to do, he spread his claws, the reasonableness of it, the sheer kindness, is what you already do. Keep him calm. Walk him out when the crowd wants him. And now and then, when a prefect needs reminding of something, or a rival needs to understand his place, stand beside your friend while he makes the reminder. He smiled. You'd never have to hurt anything yourself. You'd only have to be near him. Surely that's no hardship. Being near him is the only thing you've wanted for 11 years. And this was the cleverness of it, the thing Oru had warned her of, the bar made of kindness. Because it was true. Being near Barley was the only thing she had wanted, and Threll was offering it to her forever, wrapped in comfort, and all she had to do in exchange was let her friend, the cub she had fed on stolen milk, the warm black hill she had slept against in a cold barn, become the aimed instrument of the same machine that had taken him off Elsby's rest in the first place. All she had to do was hold the leash. All she had to do was become the thing the drones had been. And if I'd rather just take him home, Cora said, very quietly, and let him be an animal instead of a weapon. Threll's smile did not change. That was the frightening part. Nothing in him changed at all. He simply reached for a dish and served himself unhurried and said, in exactly the same warm, reasonable voice, there are 41 humans in the Sunder's feed Warren, Mistress Vane. I looked into it. 9 of them came off the same reclamation circuit you did. I understand there's a woman, Perrin, who taught you the drain lines on the Kessel barge. An older man, Aldous, who I'm told you call uncle, though you're no blood. 2 children born to the Warren who have never seen a sky. He ate delicately. Frontier stock is durable, but it isn't cheap to replace, and a concession runs on margins. If my finest instrument were to go home to be an animal and my season's takings were to go home with it, I'd have to find those margins elsewhere. I'd have to run the Warren harder, feed it less. Work it in the reclamation gases the free crews won't touch. It wouldn't be cruelty, you understand, just arithmetic. He looked up and let her see, for one bare instant, the thing under the warmth. You've spent your whole life keeping soft things alive. I'd hate for the price of one very large hard thing's freedom to be paid by 41 small soft ones, but arithmetic is arithmetic and I'd have no choice. Whereas if you were to stay and be sensible and hold the leash, why, I'd have every reason in the galaxy to keep those 41 warmly fed and gently worked for the rest of their natural lives. He returned to his meal. Think it over. There's no hurry. The beast isn't going anywhere, and neither, I'm afraid, are they. Cora looked at her hands in her lap. And she did the hardest thing she had done since she walked out onto the sand, harder than the sand had been. She lowered her head another degree and let her shoulders round and said, in a small voice she had to reach 11 years down to find, I'll need to think. Of course you will, Threll said kindly, and Cora heard in the kindness that he thought the key had begun to turn. Good, she thought, behind the wall she had built when she was 11, the wall he could not see behind. Let him think it. Let him think it right up until the moment the barn door opens and there's nothing inside. Because a beast that will only rise for one human is a research problem, and the Conquered solved research problems the way it solved everything. Threll assigned 3 keepers to study Cora Vane, and the study produced the finest unintended comedy the Sunder's staff had seen in a generation. Gaunt Keeper Oru was put in charge of it, which suited Oru, because it let him stand beside Cora all day with a data slate and a straight face while he was, in fact, teaching her the watch rotations and the lock codes under the cover of official Conquered science. But the 2 younger keepers assigned under him, Vesh and a diligent scale-green female named Talon, took the work with deadly seriousness, and it was from their solemn, meticulous, entirely wrong conclusions that the trouble and the legend grew. They watched Cora approach the beast, and they recorded with instruments the exact angle at which she held her open hands. They watched her lower her eyes and they measured the degree. They watched her cross the pen at her even unhurried pace, and they clocked it and found that she covered the distance to the beast in the same number of seconds every time. And they wrote this down as though it were the secret, as though the number were the key, as though a keeper who walked at exactly Cora's pace with his hands at exactly Cora's angle would be met with exactly the beast's piece, instead of exactly the beast's teeth. They called it, Talon coined it in her careful report, and it spread through the Keeper Corps within a day and across the whole station within 3, the open-hand walk. They wrote it up as doctrine. There was a diagram. There were prescribed hand angles. There was a recommended breathing cadence, derived from close observation of the human's respiration as she crossed the sand, and a note that the practitioner should void the mind of hostile intent, as if hostile intent were a thing of Vashak measured with a caliper, rather than smelled coming off a keeper who had held a goad every day of his working life. And there was the matter of the humming. Cora hummed to Barley, she always had. On the cold nights in the barn, she had hummed a thrashing song her mother sang over the winter grain, a plain tuneless frontier thing with no words that mattered, and the cub had learned it as the sound that meant warmth and safety and stolen milk. And 11 years and a galaxy of pain later, the grown beast still went soft to it, still lowered its great head, and let its amber eyes half close when the small human made the low tuneless sound that no goad had ever made. The keepers recorded the humming. They could not reproduce it. A Vharn throat does not make a human sound, but they wrote it up all the same, gravely, as a critical component of the pacification protocol. And Talon, who had a thorough mind, gave it a name too. She called it, in the report, the low song, and she noted that its function appeared to be the induction of a settled state in the subject animal, and she recommended that all future handlers be trained in its cadence, and Oru read this over her shoulder and had to leave the pen for a while to compose himself. Because the joke of it, the joke Threll never saw, the joke that was, Oru slowly understood, the whole shape of the thing the Conquered could not grasp, was that there was no protocol. There was no open-hand walk and no low song and no pacification and no key. There was a woman who loved an animal and an animal that loved her back, and the entire scientific apparatus of the Sethric Conquered had been brought to bear on it, and it had produced a diagram of hand angles and a named breathing cadence, and a solemn tactical designation for a mother's thrashing song. Everything except the one true fact, which was too simple for the catalog to hold, which was that you cannot walk the open-hand walk because there is no walk, there is only 11 years. And you cannot sing the low song because there is no song, there is only being the one hand that never came with a goad. They're going to get someone killed, Oru told Cora low over the slates the 3rd day of the study. Vesh believes it, he's practiced the walk. He wants to try it on the beast, to prove the doctrine. The old keeper's jaw was tight. He's a good boy and he's going to walk out to that animal with his hands at the prescribed angle and his mind prescribed empty, and it's going to smell 40 years of goad fear on him the way it smells it on all of us, and it's going to open him up, and Threll will write it off as an implementation error and revise the diagram. Cora looked across the pen at Barley, who lay watching her with his chin on the floor and his amber eyes half closed, at peace, in the middle of a facility that had spent 11 years unable to touch him. "Then don't let Vesh try it," she said. "And Aru, when we go, we take him with us if he'll come. Vesh, the boy. He's the only one of them who ever really wanted to understand the beast instead of use it. That's worth something. That's the fourth thing, isn't it? Wanting to understand." She almost smiled. "We could use a keeper who wants to understand where we're going." Oru looked at her a long moment. "And where are we going, Stock?" he said. "You keep saying home, you've no home. The Conquered took your world 11 years ago. Elsby's Rest is a Conquered catalog entry now, a reclamation grid. There's no barn, there's no ridge, there's nothing to take him back to." Cora was quiet. "There's cold and dark and open range at the edge of the settled worlds," she said finally. "Beyond the catalog, past where the frigates bother to go. There are frontier worlds the Conquereds never folded in because they're not worth the folding, too poor, too far, too small to matter. My father used to talk about them, the unlisted places. He said a family could go there and just stop being counted." She looked at the beast. "That's where I'm taking him. Somewhere off the catalog where there's cold enough for a Vashak and range enough for him to be what he is and nobody counting. It doesn't have to be Elsby's Rest. It just has to be a place where he can be an animal instead of a weapon and nobody comes to acquire him." Her jaw set in the stubborn line Oru had come to know. "I couldn't take him up the ridge when I was 13. They came first. I'm going to take him up the ridge now. It just has to be a different ridge." The prefect's warning came on the 8th day, and it came, as such things did in the Conquered, in the form of a courtesy. A message drone docked at Arduvek bearing the compliments of Prefect Descendant Gossel Vane. No relation. A coincidence of the trade tongue's transliteration that Cora found she could not laugh at, who governed the whole spinward reach of the Conquered, and to whom the Sunder concession ultimately answered. The Prefect Descendant, the message said, had heard the most diverting reports concerning the Blackmane, and had determined to honor the Sunder with a personal visit at the turning of the 10th day, at which time he looked forward to witnessing the concession's celebrated instrument demonstrate the mastery for which it was renowned. He was bringing guests. He was bringing, the message noted, rivals whom he wished to impress, and a Conquered tactical acquisitions officer, whom he wished to advise on the instrument's potential for wider deployment. Threll read the message 3 times and understood every layer of it. The Prefect Descendant had heard the joke. Of course he had. The whole station had heard the joke, and the joke had climbed the tiers the way jokes did, up out of the service warrens and the garrison mess, and into the ears of the powerful. And now the most powerful being in the spinward reach was coming in person, with rivals to impress and an acquisitions officer at his shoulder, to see for himself whether the Sunder's celebrated weapon was still a weapon or had become a punchline. And the acquisitions officer at his shoulder meant the other thing, the thing Threll had feared from the first hour on the sand, that if the weapon proved out, the Conquered would want it wholly for wider deployment, and a concession warden did not tell a Prefect Descendant no. Threll would demonstrate mastery of the greatest weapon in the settled dark, and the reward for the demonstration would be that the weapon was taken from him and he was thanked. Unless the demonstration proved that the weapon could not be deployed without the human, and the human could not be deployed at all, because the human was Threll turned it, cold and clean, because the human was fragile and frightened and dependent and irreplaceable and belonged, body and manifest and every soft thing she loved, to Vasek Threll. If the Prefect Descendant came and saw an aimed apocalypse that would only answer to one small trembling human, and understood, in front of his rivals and his acquisitions officer, that the human answered only to Threll, then the Conquered could not take the weapon, because the weapon came with a key that could not be pried loose without breaking, and the whole apparatus would leave Arduvek understanding that Vasek Threll held, alone, the one leash in the galaxy that could aim the Blackmane. not a warden to be thanked and stripped, a power to be courted. It could be done. It only required that the demonstration go perfectly, that the human walk the beast out in front of the prefect ascendant and his guests, and on Threll's word in front of witnesses, aim it. Point it at a target and let it do, on command in cold blood, the thing the whole galaxy feared it for, a killing to order, the proof that the leash was real and the leash was Threll's. And it required, therefore, that the human be made to understand, completely and before the 10th day, that she would do exactly as she was told when the moment came, or every soft thing she had ever kept alive would pay for her refusal in front of the most powerful audience in the Reach. "Bring me Drius Corin," Threll said to the empty box, "and have the garrison move 9 humans out of the feed Warren into the holding cells on the pen level, the one she came up the circuit with, the old man, the woman Perrin, the 2 children." He looked down at the sand, and for the first time in 11 seasons, Vasek Threll felt something close to contentment, because for the first time in 11 seasons, the Blackmane was a weapon he could aim. Put them where she can see them on her way to the beast every morning. Don't harm them. Don't even frighten them particularly. Just put them where she'll walk past them. Let her do the arithmetic herself. She's a clever animal. She'll get there. Drius Corin did not like it, and the old soldiers not liking it was the first crack in Threll's clean design, though Threll never saw the crack open. Corin had commanded the Arduvek garrison for a long time, and he had done a great many things in the conquered service that he did not examine too closely, because a soldier who examines his orders too closely does not stay a soldier. But he had come up on the frontier himself, generations back, before his line was folded in, and there was a thing in him, buried, unspoken, a thing he would have denied if asked, that did not sit easy with penning children to make an arithmetic. He moved the 9 humans as ordered. He put them in the pen-level cells as ordered. And then, because he was a thorough officer and it was within his discretion, he went down himself to see that they were housed cleanly, and he stood outside the cell of the 2 Warren-born children who had never seen a sky, and he watched them press their small faces to the mesh to look at the great black beast in the deep pen across the way, and he heard the older one, a girl of perhaps 6, say to the younger without fear, with wonder, "That's Cora's friend. Cora found him when he was little. She's going to take us all somewhere with a sky." And something in the old soldier's chest that he had penned up as long as he'd penned up anything shifted against its bars. He said nothing. He was a conquered officer. He completed his orders and logged them and went back up to the garrison level. But that night Drius Corin sat a long while in the dark of his quarters, and he thought about ridges he had never seen and skies, and about the fact that in 40 years of soldiering he had learned exactly one true thing, which was that you could tell the whole worth of a power by what it did to the smallest thing in its reach, and that by that measure, the power he served had just failed a test it did not know it was taking. He did not decide anything that night. Old soldiers do not decide quickly. But when Gauntkeeper Oru came to him 2 days later, gruff and sideways and speaking in the careful half-language of a being feeling for an ally, and asked, as if idly, about the watch rotations on the frigate dock and the old mechanical override on the Deep Warren locks, Drius Corin, who could have arrested the old keeper on the spot and been commended for it, instead poured 2 measures of garrison spirit and pushed one across the table and said, "Sit down, keeper, and tell me what the girl's really planning, all of it. Because the 10th day is coming, and the warden's about to ask that beast to kill on command in front of the prefect ascendant, and I've been a soldier 40 years, and I've never yet seen a plan built on penning children that didn't end with the wrong people in the ground." He drank. "So let's you and me see if we can't arrange for it to be the right ones." In the days before the prefect's arrival, Vasek Threll needed to be certain of one thing, and being a careful man, he tested it. He could not rely on the demonstration going as he designed unless he knew, for a fact and in advance, that the trigger he meant to pull was real, that threatening the human in front of the beast would move the beast. He did not intend to find out for the first time on the sand, with the prefect descendant watching. So he ordered what his keepers logged, blandly, as a stimulus response calibration, and what Gaunt Keeper Oru would call, for the rest of his life, the afternoon he learned exactly what the Blackmane had been holding back for 11 years. They did it in the deep pen, with the beast behind the heaviest lattice the Sunder owned, the storm-grade barrier, 3 layers of shock field braided through a lattice of cerulloy bar, rated to hold a charging tunnel drake, a barrier no beast had ever so much as dented. Threll watched from the observation gantry with Sethin at his side, and a data slate logging the beast's vitals. And on the pen floor on the human side of the barrier, a garrison trooper, a big scarred veteran chosen for the work, took Cora Vane by the arm, hard, and shoved her against the wall, and drew back a foreclaw as if to strike her. He did it once, he never got the chance to do it twice. Oru on the gantry had time to see 3 things in the space of a single breath. He saw the beast, which had been lying with its back to the barrier, already across the pen, not rising and then crossing. The 2 motions had become one, 60 tons moving faster than 60 tons had any right to move. He saw it hit the storm-grade lattice, the barrier rated to hold a charging drake, and he saw the barrier move. The whole braided wall of cerulloy and shock field bowed inward under the impact like a sheet of hull plate struck by a hauler, the shock field screaming up into overload, a full hand span of deflection where no beast had ever produced a finger's width. And he saw the trooper, the big scarred veteran who had shoved the human, drop the arm and stagger back with his own weapon coming up on pure spinal reflex, his face gone the gray of a Viharn who has understood, all at once and too late, that the thing on the other side of the barrier is not going to be stopped by the barrier, and that the only reason he is still alive is that the barrier has not yet finished failing. Barley. It was the human's voice, and it cut through the shriek of the overloading fields, flat and low and absolute, the way it had cut through everything else. No, no, stop, I'm all right. Look at me, I'm all right, he barely touched me, stop. She had pushed herself off the wall and put her open hands up toward the bowed and screaming barrier, toward the amber eyes gone entirely wild on the far side of it, and she was not backing away from the beast. She was moving toward it into the danger the way she always did. Stop, Barley, down, it's over. Look, nothing's hurt. Down now. For me. Down. And she hummed, 3 cracked notes of the low song, into the overload shriek, and pressed her open palm flat against the bowed and sparking lattice, close enough that the beast on the far side could have taken her whole arm through the failing barrier had it wanted to. The beast did not want to. The beast had never once wanted to. It stopped, its great chest heaving against the ruined lattice, its amber eyes fixed on the human's face and its whole enormous body shaking with the arrested violence of it. And slowly, slowly, as she hummed and murmured and kept her palm flat against the bars, it came down off the edge of the thing it had been about to become, and lowered its head, and pressed its brow against the lattice opposite her hand, and stood there trembling, and the shock fields, spared the load, whined slowly back down out of overload. On the gantry, nobody spoke for a while. Log it, Threll said finally. His voice was steady. He had gotten what he came for. The calibration was a complete success. The trigger was real, and it was, if anything, far stronger than he had dared hope. Threaten the human, and the beast came apart hard enough to bow a barrier rated for a charging drake, hard enough that no lattice the Sunder owned could be relied upon to hold it. On the 10th day, on the open sand with no barrier at all, threatening the human would produce a detonation of exactly the magnitude Threll needed to demonstrate the leash. He had proven his instrument. He should have been pleased. He was not pleased. Sethin, beside him, saw the thing move behind his careful stillness and understood it because she had been thinking it herself. The calibration had proven the trigger. It had also proven that the trigger could not be unpulled. That once the beast came apart, no barrier and no garrison and no science in the Sethric conquered could stop it, and that the only thing in the settled dark that had ever stopped it, The only break that existed on the most dangerous weapon the conquered had ever caged was the voice of the one small human the whole demonstration was built on threatening. Threll was going to stand on the lip of his box on the 10th day and pull that trigger in front of the most powerful audience in the Reach. And the only thing that could stop what he pulled was the very person he was pulling it against. "Log it," Threll said again, and turned from the gantry, and did not look back at the pen, where a piece of frontier stock stood with her palm flat against a ruined barrier, humming an old song to the hardest thing in the galaxy, while it trembled and pressed its brow to the bars and let her, and only her, bring it back from the edge. By then the story was everywhere on Ardu Vec, and it did not spread the way Threll's story spread, down from the box. It spread the way water spreads up from the bottom. Perrin heard it first in the feed Warren, from a gas screw hand who had it from a dock loader, who had it from a low garrison trooper who had stood the pen-level watch. The story of the calibration, of the barrier that bowed, of the small human who had walked into the failing shock fields to bring the beast back. Perrin had taught Cora the drain lines on the Kessel barge 11 years and 4 stations ago, when Cora was a thin, fierce girl of 13 who never cried and never explained, and never once, in all those years, told a living soul why she was working her way inward instead of outward, toward the machine instead of away from it. Perrin had wondered sometimes on the long shifts. She understood now. She understood, and she found she was not surprised, because she had known the girl a long time and had always suspected there was a coal in her somewhere, banked and patient, waiting on a wind. The story changed as it climbed, the way stories do. In the feed Warrens it was a story about one of their own, a stock hand, branded and non-personed like all of them, who had walked out onto the sand the free Viharn owned and made the hardest thing in the galaxy lie down in the dirt. In the reclamation cruise it was a story about the machine being wrong, which was the sweetest story a reclamation crew ever got to tell, because the machine was never wrong. The machine cataloged and assessed and acquired, and was never, ever wrong, and here, at last, was a thing the whole vast certain machine had gotten completely and catastrophically wrong, and a small brown drudge had stood on the sand and proven it in front of 40,000 witnesses. And in the low garrison, among the troopers who came up from folded worlds themselves generations back and stood the watches the free Viharn would not stand, it was a quieter story, and a more dangerous one, and it had in it a question that low troopers did not usually let themselves ask out loud, which was, if the machine was wrong about her, what else is it wrong about? Perrin did not know that old Aldous, 3 cells down, was already being watched, or that in 2 days she and the children would be moved to the pen level to become an arithmetic in a warden's calculation. She knew only that the story had gotten into the Warren like warmth into a cold barn, and that the taken peoples of 100 folded worlds, who had spent their whole lives being told they were the smallest things in the machine, had begun to stand a little straighter over the feed lines in the drain trenches, and to hum, some of them, without quite knowing why, a plain, tuneless frontier thrashing song that a stock hand named Cora Vane had been heard to sing to a beast. The low song, the free keepers called it now. Gravely, in their reports, never once understanding that it was only a lullaby a dead world's mothers had sung over the winter grain, and that the reason it was spreading through the Warrens of Ardu Vec was the oldest reason there is, which is that a people who have been made small will hold, in their hearts, against all the weight of the machine, the story of one of their own who turned out to be larger than everything that held them down. The free Viharn heard the humming and did not understand it. The free Viharn never did learn what it meant. But Drius Corin, old soldier, come up off a folded world himself, heard it drifting up out of the service tiers on the 9th evening, and stood a long moment in the dark of his quarters listening to it, and knew, finally and completely, which way he was going to look when the 10th day came. On the 8th night, before the cells and the arithmetic, Gaunt Keeper Oru sat up late in the deep pen with the beast and the human, and learned the last of what he had been wrong about for 40 years. He had brought the beast's record, the whole 11-season file, the one Threll's keepers kept and Threll's science produced, the catalog of a legend. Oru had read it 100 times over the years, and it had told him nothing, because it was written in the only language the conquered had, the language of tame, break, or kill, and the beast had refused all 3 languages, and so the file was 11 years of a machine describing, in ever more elaborate terms, a thing it could not see. Oru laid the slate on the pen floor between himself and Cora, in the warm dark, with the great black flank rising and falling beside them, and he showed her the file, because he thought, he was not sure why, that she of all beings had a right to read it. She read it in silence for a long time, the scars catalogued and numbered, the 9 keepers, each with a date, the interventions, the goad regimens, the deprivation protocols, the long, ugly efforts of 11 years of the conquered's best minds trying to find the seam in a thing that had no seam. Cora read it all, her split hands flat on the cold floor, her face still, and Oru watched her read it and saw, under the stillness, the thing he had no comfort for, which was a young woman reading, in a machine's flat catalog tongue, the exact record of what had been done to her friend in the 11 years she spent crossing a galaxy to reach him. He never fought back, she said at last, not a question. She had found the pattern in it that the keepers never had because she was reading it in a different language than the one it was written in. Look, 11 years, 9 keepers, but look at the dates, Oru. He never killed a keeper on a goad day, never once during a regimen. Took all of it, and he never fought back while they were hurting him. Her voice was very steady, which Oru had learned was how she held the hardest things. He only ever killed them after, on the clean days, when they came into the pen thinking they'd finally broken him gentle, thinking the regimen had worked, thinking they could put a hand on him. She looked up and her eyes were dry and terrible. He wasn't defending himself, Oru. He'd have let them hurt him forever. He was waiting. 11 years, he was waiting, and every keeper who ever thought he'd gone tame, who ever reached for him the way you reach for a broken thing, he showed them the difference between broken and waiting. He wasn't mad, and he wasn't savage, and he wasn't the hardest thing in the galaxy. She put her hand flat on the great warm flank, and it stirred, and one amber eye opened a slit and found her enclosed again, content, the way it had never once closed for any other living thing. He was just a boy who knew, the whole time, that his friend was coming, and he was not going to let any of them make him into something she wouldn't know when she got here. Oru sat with that a long while in the warm dark, beside the sleeping legend and the small brown human who had read 11 years of a machine's cruelty, and found, underneath it, the one thing the machine could never catalog, which was faith. He had kept beasts 40 years. He had thought he knew every language an animal could speak. He had been wrong about the last and truest one his whole life, and he was old enough, now, and humbled enough, to be grateful he had lived long enough to be taught it. "There's a thing we say in the trade," he said finally, gruff, looking at the beast and not at her. "When a keeper's raised something from the shell, tended it right, done the years, we say the animal's keeping is done, meaning you can trust it, meaning the bond's set and it'll hold." He cleared his throat. 40 years I've said it about beasts I trained. I never once meant it the way it's true right here on this floor tonight. He put his old scarred hand slowly, where the beast could see it, flat on the black flank beside the human's small one, and the great animal let him, which no beast in the Sunder would have believed and Oru would not have believed a fortnight before. "His keeping's done, Cora Vane," the old keeper said quietly. "It's been done for 11 years. You did it in a barn when you were a child, and it held across a whole galaxy of everything they could do to break it. I've never seen its equal, and I never will again." He was quiet a moment. "Whatever happens on the 10th day, you should know that. Somebody who spent his whole life at this trade looked at what you made, and knew it for the finest keeping he ever saw. His keeping's done. Now let's you and me and that soft old soldier and the boy get the 2 of you home. Word of the key travels faster than word of the beast, and on the 9th night someone tried to take it. Sethan caught the edge of it first, at the wager lines, where she caught the edge of most things. a private contract moving through channels it had no business in, a quiet interest from one of the three rival lords the prefect descendant was bringing to overshadow, a lordling named Vasker Thrain who had understood the same arithmetic Threll had understood on the first day, and had decided not to wait for the 10th. If the beast obeyed only the human, and the human could be taken, then the weapon could be owned by whoever held the human, and a lord who arrived at Arduvek already holding the key would arrive holding the greatest instrument in the settled dark, and the prefect descendant himself would have to court him for it. It was, Sethain had to admit, exactly the move Threll would have made in the lordling's place. It was only that the lordling was in a hurry, and being in a hurry made him stupid, and being stupid around the Blackmane was a thing that had a very short history. They came for Cora in the small hours, 3 of Thrain's retainers in unmarked garrison gray, through a service door Threll's thin night watch had left thin. They knew the human was quartered on the guest tier now, elevated, unguarded because Threll wanted her to feel unguarded. They did not know, because the catalog did not have it, because no one in the machine had ever understood it, that the human had not slept a single night in the fine guest quarters. She slept where she had slept for 11 years in her heart, and 3 nights in fact. In the deep pen, against the great warm flank of the beast, because the quarters had a bed and a window and a door that locked, and none of those things were the only thing in the galaxy she had ever wanted to sleep beside. So the 3 retainers went to the guest tier and found an empty bed, and then, being in a hurry, they made the last mistake of their careers. They went down to the deep pen to take her from there. Oru was not on watch, but Vesh was, and the boy changed, awake now to the 4th thing. A keeper at last instead of a technician, saw them on the pen-level monitors and understood in one cold instant exactly what he was watching and exactly what was about to happen to them, and keyed the pen comm and said, low and urgent, the only thing that could have mattered. Cora, wake up, wake him up, now. 3 coming down the north gangway, and they're coming for you. And then Vesh did the one merciful thing available to him, which was to trip the pen-level alarm, not to summon the guard, but to wake the 3 retainers to the sound of their own deaths approaching, so that at least one of them might have the sense to run. None of them ran. They came into the deep pen with stun cord and a sedative lance meant for the human, and they found the human already on her feet in the dark, awake, calm, standing beside a rising black shape the size of a grain hauler, and the foremost of them got out perhaps half of a command, the girl, take the. Before the deep pen taught the retainers of Lord Vasker Thrain the same lesson it had been teaching the Sethric conquered for 11 years, which was that the space around the small brown human was not a space where you took anything. It was over fast, and Cora stopped it fast, and afterward there was very little for the morning crew to clean, because the beast did not maul what it removed from her vicinity. It simply removed it, with the unbothered economy of a thing performing a chore, and then it came back to her and put its head down and let her hum it quiet. 2 of the 3 retainers lived, because Cora's voice reached the beast before it finished, and they lived to be carried up to the garrison infirmary, babbling a version of events that Drius Corin listened to with a stone face, and then filed under a designation that ensured no one important would ever read it. The 3rd had been the one holding the sedative lance aimed at Cora when the lights came up, and the beast had reached him first, and about the 3rd there was nothing to file. You see the trouble now, Oru said grimly in the gray before dawn, surveying the pen while Vesh, white and steady, logged what could be logged. It's not just Threll anymore. The whole Reach has done the arithmetic. Every lord and prefect and concession master between here and the core has worked out that whoever holds you holds the beast, and there's a galaxy of them and one of you, and they're going to keep coming tonight, and the 10th day and every day after for the rest of your life, however long a life that turns out to be. He looked at her hard, the keeper's question in it again. You understand what that means. Even if we get you off this station, even if you reach your cold nothing world, As long as the Reach believes the beast is a weapon and you're the key to it, they will never, ever stop coming to acquire the two of you. There's no ridge far enough. Cora looked down at the beast, at the amber eyes gone soft and content again, at the warm black hill she had slept against, and she was quiet a moment. And then she said the thing that Oru realized later had been the whole of her plan's second half all along, the half she had never let herself say out loud because saying it out loud made it real. Then we don't let them keep believing it, she said. That's why it has to happen on the sand, Oru, in front of everyone. In front of the prefect and the Reach and 40,000 witnesses and every lord who's done the arithmetic. She put her hand in the Blackmane. Threll thinks he's staging a demonstration of mastery. Let him. Because what the Reach is actually going to watch on the 10th day is the truth that he isn't a weapon and I'm not a key and there's no leash and there never was. They're going to watch the hardest thing in the galaxy pass up a target it was ordered to kill and go straight for the one being who threatened me, and they're going to understand, all of them at once, that this can't be owned. Not by Threll, not by the prefect, not by a lord who steals me in the night. Her jaw set in the stubborn line. You can't acquire a thing that only answers to love, Oru. The moment you take the one it loves, the thing you wanted stops existing and all you're holding is your own death. The whole Reach is about to learn that in the same hour in front of each other from the most powerful witness in the spinward dark. She almost smiled, tired and fierce in the gray light. After that, nobody comes to the cold nothing world, not because they can't find us. Because every lord in the Reach will have watched with his own eyes exactly what happens to the last being who tried to own my friend. That's the only wall that ever holds out past the catalog, not distance, a story everyone saw. She looked up at the old keeper. So we don't run from the demonstration, we use it. We let Threll build the biggest stage in the Reach, and then we tell the truth on it, so loud and so plain that the whole galaxy hears it once and never forgets. And then we go home, and nobody follows because they all know how the following ends. Oru looked at her a long time in the gray before dawn, the small brown human, the great black beast, the two bodies in the pen that no cage and no lord and no machine could hold apart. And the old keeper understood that the girl had been 3 moves ahead of the whole Reach since the day she walked out onto the sand, and that the thing he had taken for a doomed and simple wish, take him home, was in fact the most complete piece of keeping he had ever been privileged to watch a keeper work. His keeping's done, Oru said again, quietly, almost to himself, and this time he understood the whole of what it meant. And so, it seems, is yours. He straightened and set his old shoulders and became, one last time, the thing he had been for 40 years and would be for 1 day more. Right then. Get what sleep you can. The prefect comes tomorrow, and we've a truth to tell on the biggest stage in the spinward dark, and only the one chance to tell it right. They put the cells on the path between Cora's fine quarters and the deep pen, and every morning for 2 mornings Cora walked the path, and the arithmetic did exactly what Threll had built it to do. The first morning she nearly broke. Aldous was in the second cell, old Aldous, who had taught her which reclamation gases would kill you slow and which would kill you fast, who had called her girl for 9 years across 4 stations, and shared his ration when hers ran short, and never once asked her why she was working her way inward when every sensible instinct said run outward, toward the edge, toward the dark. He stood at the mesh when she passed, and he did not call out to her, because Aldous was old Warren and he knew the mics were on, and he knew the exact shape of the trap she was in, and so he only looked at her and gave her the smallest nod, the one that meant steady, girl, I'm all right, don't you spend yourself on me. And in the next cell were the 2 children, Perrin's fosterlings, the 6-year-old and her small brother, and they were not old Warren. They did not understand the mics or the trap, and the little one put his hand through the mesh and said, Cora, are we going to the sky place now? And Cora had to keep walking, had to keep her head down and her hands loose and her face empty, past the child's outstretched hand, toward the beast, while every cell in her body screamed to tear the mesh open with her fingers. She did not break. She had 11 years of not breaking in her, and she poured all of it into the path. And she reached the deep pen, and she put her hands in the Blackmane, and she pressed her forehead to Barley's brow, and she hummed the low, tuneless song. And the great beast went soft under her hands. And only Barley, who knew her better than anything alive, could feel how hard the small human was shaking. 2 more days, she told him, too low for the mics into the main. 2 more days and we take everybody up the ridge, all of them, the children too. I promise you, I've never broken a promise to you yet. The amber eye rolled to her. The furnace breath stirred her hair. I know, she said. I know, I want to tear the walls down too, but we do it right or we do it and they die, so we wait. 2 more days. Be my good patient monster, 2 more days. Vesh tried the open-hand walk on the second afternoon, and it went exactly the way Oru had said it would. And it was the thing that turned the boy, and, in turning him, gave Cora the last piece of what she needed. He did it while Oru was up in the garrison level with Drius Corin, which was, Cora understood later, not an accident of timing but the boy choosing his moment, wanting to prove the doctrine without the old keeper there to forbid it. Vesh had studied Cora for 8 days. He had the hand angles. He had the breathing cadence. He had voided his mind of hostile intent as thoroughly as a diligent young keeper could void it, which was to say not at all, because Vesh had held a goad every working day of his life, and the beast in the deep pen had 11 years of reasons to know precisely what the smell of a goad holder meant. Cora was across the pen-level yard at the waterline when she heard the gate servo and turned, and saw the scale-green young keeper walking out across the deep pen at exactly her pace, hands open at exactly her angle, straight toward Barley, with a face full of solemn scientific courage and a body reeking, to the beast, of 11 years of the goad. Barley came up off the floor like weather breaking. There was no bow in it, there was no peace. The beast that lay soft under Cora's hands rose in a single black surge, and the furnace sound became something Cora had heard only twice in her life, both times through a service grill. The sound the Blackmane made in the instant before a keeper went into the ground, and Vesh froze in the middle of his prescribed walk with his hands still at their prescribed angle and every prescription in the world about to be worthless, and Cora did not think. She was already moving. She was across the yard and through the inner gate, which she was not cleared to open and opened anyway, Oru's override code under her fingers before she decided to use it, and she was between the boy and the beast with her back to Vesh, and her open hands up toward Barley and her voice going out of her flat and low and absolute. No. That was all, one word. And the black surge that was already half across the pen, the 60 tons of legend that had killed 9 keepers and could not be moved by any goad in the Concord's arsenal, stopped as if it had run into a wall, one enormous forepaw already lifted, and stood there over the 2 of them, trembling with the arrested violence of it, its amber eyes wild and fixed not on the prey but on Cora, the way a dog looks at the one voice it will break itself to obey. No, Cora said again, softer now, and hummed 3 notes of the low song and put one open hand flat against the great heaving chest. He's not with a goad, Barley. Look, he's stupid and he's young and he doesn't understand yet, but he's not going to hurt me and you're not going to hurt him. Down now. Down, for me. Down. The beast came down, slowly, shuddering, fighting every instinct 11 years of the goad had burned into it. The Blackmane lowered its lifted paw and sank back onto its haunches and put its great black head down, its breath still coming in furnace heaves, its eyes never leaving Cora, and behind her Vesh made a small broken sound and sat down hard on the pen floor because his legs had stopped working. Cora did not turn around until she was sure. Then she did, and she looked at the boy sitting white and shaking on the floor of the pen he had nearly died in, and she did not shout at him. She crouched down in front of him, at his eye level, the way she'd crouched in the fodder in front of a dying cub 11 years before. There's no walk, she said quietly. You understand now. There's no walk and there's no song and there's no doctrine. He didn't stop for the angle of my hands. He stopped because it was me, and there's only one me, and 11 years made her, and you can't study your way into being her in 8 days with a data slate. You'd have died proving a diagram. She reached out slowly, so the beast could see it and gripped the boy's shaking shoulder. But you walked out there anyway to understand him instead of use him. That's the only thing in this whole facility worth a damn. So here's what you're going to do with it, Vesh. You're going to stop trying to be me. And you're going to help me get him somewhere that nobody ever points him at anything again. Because you're the only keeper here besides Oru who ever wanted the animal to be an animal. And where we're going to need one of those. Vesh looked at her and looked at the beast, the hardest thing in the galaxy, sitting trembling and obedient behind her because a small human had said down, and the boy's scientific certainties fell off him all at once. The whole solemn apparatus of catalog and doctrine and pacification protocol. And what was left underneath was just a young keeper who had gone into the trade, once, a long time and 8 days ago, because he had loved animals. Tell me what you need, Vesh said. What Cora needed was a way off a station that had no way off for stock, and by the eve of the 10th day, between the 4 of them, they had assembled one out of the specific, individual blindnesses of the machine that held them. Oru brought the pens and the beast. He knew the Deepwarren locks, the old mechanical overrides Threll had never paid to replace, the service lift shafts that ran from the pen level down to the frigate dock without passing a single man checkpoint, because they had been built for hauling beast carcasses, and no one had ever imagined stock or beast going up them alive. He knew how to move the Blackmane, not with goads, that was finished, but the way Cora moved him, walking beside her with the boy Vesh learning the pace, 3 keepers and a legend that would follow one small human wherever she walked. Drius Corin brought the garrison. This was the piece without which none of the rest was worth anything, and the old soldier brought it slowly, over 3 long conversations in the dark of his quarters, feeling the weight of 40 years of orders against the weight of 2 children pressed to a cell mesh looking for a sky. He would not, he said, turn the garrison. That was more than an old soldier could do and more than the plan could survive. A turned garrison was a mutiny, and a mutiny was a battle, and a battle would get the children killed first. But a garrison did not need to be turned. It needed only to be looking the wrong way at the right moment, and the commander of the garrison was the being who decided which way it looked. On the 10th day, with the prefect descendant in the box and the whole elite of the Reach watching the sand, the garrison's attention would be exactly where Threll wanted it, on the spectacle, on the demonstration, on the aimed apocalypse. Corin would simply see to it that the pen-level watch was thin, and the frigate dock watch thinner, and that a certain old mechanical override was, through an administrative oversight he would personally log and personally lose, left unmonitored for the quarter hour the spectacle ran. And Cora brought the reason it would work at all, which was that Threll's own trap had a flaw Threll could not see, because Threll did not understand the thing he was trading in. Threll thought the leash ran one way, that he held the human, and the human held the beast, and so the beast was his. But Cora had walked out onto the sand and put her hands on a legend, and she understood, as Threll never would, that the leash ran both ways and the beast held her too, and that a thing which loves is not a thing which can be aimed, it is only a thing which can be provoked. Threll believed he had built a weapon he could fire on command. What he had actually built and did not know he had built was a bomb with a single trigger, and the trigger was any harm, in front of the beast, to the one human it loved. Threll thought he had spent the 10th day arranging a demonstration of his mastery. He had, in fact, arranged to stand the most powerful audience in the Spinward Reach directly beside that trigger, and to place his own hand upon it, and to pull. "He's going to order me to make Barley kill," Cora said the last night in the dark of the deep pen, the 4 of them close and low around the great warm flank of the sleeping beast. In front of the prefect, to prove the leash. And when I won't, because I won't, there's no version of this where I stand on that sand and point him at a living thing to save my own skin. He's going to hurt me, or hurt one of the children where I can see it to force it. He thinks that's his hold on me." She looked at the vast black shape breathing beside her, at the amber eye that opened a slit at the sound of her voice and closed again. Content. He doesn't understand that the moment he lays a hand on me on that sand in front of Barley, there is no power in the galaxy that stops what happens next. Not the garrison, not the prefect, not me. I've spent 11 years learning how to keep him calm. There's exactly one thing I can't keep him calm through, and Threll's about to build his whole demonstration on top of it. "Then the sand is where it ends," Corin said, flat, a soldier reading the ground, "not the dock, the sand. Whatever we've planned about lifts and overrides, the real thing happens on the sand in front of everyone, and it happens the moment the warden touches you. Everything else is just getting the children clear before it does." The old soldier looked at the sleeping beast, and at the small human curled fearless against it, and something that had been penned in him a very long time spoke quietly in the dark. "You know what he's going to become when it happens, in front of that crowd, what they'll see." "They'll see the Blackmane beast," Cora said. "The thing they've feared for 11 years, all of it. Everything the goad made and the catalog named and the crowds paid to shiver at, all of it, off the leash at last, in front of the most powerful audience in the Reach." She put her hand flat on the black flank, and it rose and fell under her palm, slow, at peace, the warm black hill she had slept against in a cold barn when the world was young. "And they're going to learn the thing the conquered never once put in the catalog, that it was never the beast they should have been afraid of." Her jaw set. It was what he'd do to keep her warm. Nobody said anything for a while. The beast breathed. The station hummed around them, vast and bright and certain, the great machine that catalogued and assessed and acquired, and had never once, in all its reach, imagined that the smallest thing it held could bring the whole weight of it down, not with a weapon, not with an army, but with 11 years and a thrashing song, and the simple, unkillable fact of a love it had no box for. "Get the children to the dock when the low bell strikes," Cora said finally into the dark. "Oru, Vesh, you're with them. Corin looks the garrison the wrong way. And I'll be on the sand." She looked around at the three of them, the old keeper and the young one and the old soldier, the four unlikeliest allies the Sunder had ever grown, and for the first time in 11 years, the small brown human who had made herself invisible let them see the whole of her, the coal she had carried in a cold hand across a galaxy. "Whatever you see out there tomorrow, don't send anyone in. Nobody goes near him but me. That was true on the first day, and it's true on the last." She almost smiled. "Just get everybody to the Sky Place. I'll bring him to you. I've been bringing him home for 11 years. One more day won't stop me now." Prefect Ascendant Gossel arrived on the 10th day with a retinue that filled the warden's box and a mood that Threll read, within the first exchange of courtesies, as skeptical. The prefect was a vast, pale-scaled old Viharn, grown heavy and slow in the long comfort of power, with eyes that had watched 100 wardens perform their little masteries and been impressed by none of them. He brought 3 rivals he clearly intended to overshadow, minor lords of the Spinward Reach who laughed when he laughed. And he brought, at his shoulder, a lean and silent officer in the plain gray of conquered tactical acquisitions, who did not laugh at all, who carried a data slate and made notes, and whose presence told Threll everything about how the day would go if it went well. The conquered had already decided it wanted the Blackmane. The only question the acquisitions officer had come to settle was whether it could be taken clean, or whether it came with strings. Threll intended to prove it came with strings. Threll intended to prove that the only string was Vosik Threll, and that a prefect who wished to command the Blackmane would first have to command the warden who commanded the girl who commanded the beast, a chain of obligation with Threll's own hand on every link. He had rehearsed it. He had built the whole demonstration to make the strings visible, undeniable in front of the most powerful witnesses in the Reach. He had only one variable left to control, and she was, at that moment, being walked up from the deep pens to the staging gate. Small, brown, plain, and Threll was confident, thoroughly persuaded over 2 mornings of walking past the cells, of exactly how the arithmetic worked. "They tell me it wept," the prefect descendant said, without preamble, settling his bulk into the box's high seat. Your terror of the settled dark. They tell me it lay down in the dirt and wept for a farm animal. Half the reach is laughing at you, Threll. He did not sound amused. He sounded like a man deciding whether a tool had gone dull. So, show me this mastery I've heard so much about. Show me the Concord's aimed apocalypse and show me it aims. Because if it doesn't, if I've come all this way to watch a monster cry, then I'll have my acquisitions officer here draw up a mercy, and we'll put the joke down before the whole reach forgets to be afraid of it. Do you understand me, Warden? The pale eyes fixed on Threll, ancient and cold and entirely without cruelty, which was worse than cruelty. Make it kill something, on your word, or I'll make it kill nothing ever again. Those are the day's two endings. Pick. It will kill on command, Prefect Descendant, Threll said and bowed, and did not let a single scale of him betray the thing that had just tightened in his chest. Before the low bell. On my word, through my handler in front of your guests, you have my word as concession warden. He gestured to Sethain at the lectern. Bring up the offering, and bring the handler to the sand. Down in the staging gate, a garrison officer put a hand on Cora's shoulder. Gently, Drius Corin had seen to the gentleness and said, It's time, Mistress Vane. And Cora, who had said her goodbyes in the dark of the deep pen an hour before, who knew that Oru and Vesh were already moving the children toward the frigate dock through service shafts built for carcasses, who had one word left to not say and one to say, drew the wall up around herself the way she had drawn it up at 11, and walked out through the staging gate onto the sand for the second and last time. The sunder was full past its stated capacity, and every tear of it went quiet as the small brown human crossed the sand. They had all heard the story. That was the thing Threll had failed to price, that a crowd which comes expecting a joke does not stay a crowd expecting a joke, not when the joke walks out onto the sand with her head high and her hands loose, and crosses 200 meters of open ground toward the hardest thing in the galaxy without breaking stride. Somewhere up in the service tiers, where the stock and the low garrison and the drudge crews watched on the cheap standing decks, a different quiet had taken hold, a held-breath quiet, a leaning forward quiet, the quiet of beings who have been told their whole lives that they are the smallest things in the machine and are watching one of their own walk out to prove the machine wrong. The offering gate opened at the far end of the sand, and they let the Blackmane out, and it came out at a pace that was not a beast being driven but a beast being called, straight down the length of the pit to the small human, and it lowered its great black head to her, and 40,000 Viharn made a sound that was not a laugh. Cora put her hands in the mane. She pressed her forehead to his brow. She hummed 3 notes of the low song, too quiet for anyone but the beast, and the beast went soft, and up in the black glass box the prefect descendant leaned forward, and his skepticism, for the first time, wavered into something that was almost wonder. Now, Warden, the prefect said, the command show me it aims. Threll rose. He crossed to the lip of the box, where the sand could see him and hear him, and he activated the box's address field so that his voice rolled out across the whole of the sunder, calm and warm and reasonable, the voice of a man in complete control of the most dangerous thing in the settled dark. Mistress Vane, Threll said, and 40,000 beings heard it. The prefect descendant honors us today. He wishes to see what the Concord's patience and the Concord's science have achieved. So you'll give the beast a command and it will obey, and the Reach will understand at last what the Blackmane truly is. He gestured, and at the far end of the sand the offering gate opened a second time, and a garrison drone drove out onto the pit a shackled figure in reclamation gray, a condemned prisoner, some broken piece of the Concord's justice, stumbling and blinking in the culling lights. There is your target. On my word and by your hand the beast will take it. Give the command, Mistress Vane. A beat. The warmth in his voice did not change at all. Point your friend. And on the sand, the small brown human straightened, and turned, and looked up at the black glass box, at the pale old prefect and the gray silent officer and the warden at the lip of it, and she said, in a voice she did not raise but which the address field, still open, carried to every tier of the sunder. No. The word went out across 40,000 beings, and up in the service tiers, on the cheap standing decks, something moved through the watching stock and the low garrison and the drudge crews like a current through water. Threll had expected the refusal. He had built for it. That was the whole architecture of the 2 mornings, the cells on the path, the arithmetic she was meant to have done. He leaned to the address field, unhurried, a man playing a card he had held from the start. "I understand your reluctance, Mistress Vane," he said, warm, patient, for the crowd as much as for her. "You've a tender heart. It's what makes you so gifted with the animal, but I'm afraid the day requires more of you than tenderness." He made a small gesture to Sethin, and on the great display fields that ringed the sunder, high and bright where all 40,000 could see, an image resolved, the pen level holding cells, the mesh, and behind the mesh, small and gray and frightened, old Aldous and the woman Perrin and the 2 Warren-born children pressed together looking up at a garrison officer who stood over them with a shock goad in his hand. "You have people, Mistress Vane," Threll said gently to the whole of the Reach. "The Conquered has been so good as to gather them, and the Conquered would so hate for anything to happen to them. So I'll ask you once more, and this time you'll understand the full shape of the asking." His voice did not change. It never changed. "Give the beast the command, or the goad on that level starts its work on the small ones first, and it does not stop until you do as you're told. The choice is yours. It was always yours. Point your friend, or watch what your tenderness costs the ones you love." The sunder held its breath. And 2 levels down, on the pen level, the garrison officer with the shock goad, a young trooper of Drius Corin's own command, who had received, an hour before, a quiet and specific and entirely unlogged instruction from his commander, did not activate the goad. He looked at the cell, at the children, and then he looked up at the corner of the ceiling where he knew the display feed drone hung, and he made, for the benefit of 40,000 watching beings, a great show of raising the goad, and then he stepped back and set it down and keyed the cell open and stood aside. And on the great bright display fields ringing the sunder, the whole Reach watched a Conquered garrison trooper open the cell, and watched old Aldous gather the children and the woman Perrin and move them, quickly, out of the frame, toward a service shaft where an old keeper and a young one were waiting to run them to the frigate dock. Threll stared at the display field. For 1 second, the only second of the whole day in which Vasek Threll was not in complete control of the most dangerous thing in the settled dark, he did not understand what he was looking at. "Drius," he said into the box, into his throat bead, and the warmth was gone from his voice now, all at once, and what was under it was the fear that had been there since the first hour on the sand. "Corin. Your troopers open the cell. Corin, answer, seal the pen level, seal the docks, Corin." But Drius Corin, commander of the Arduvek garrison, had turned his garrison to look the wrong way, and had, through an administrative oversight he would personally log and personally lose, gone entirely off the command channel, and was at that moment standing in the mouth of a carcass shaft on the pen level with his sidearm drawn and pointed calmly at the 2 garrison troopers who had come running to reseal it, saying, in the flat, unbothered voice of an old soldier who has finally, after 40 years, decided what the worth of a power is by what it does to the smallest thing in its reach. "Stand down, lads. There's children in that shaft. You're not going in after them. Not today. Not while I'm the one who decides which way this garrison looks." On the sand, Cora watched the display field over the warden's box show her the children going clear, and something came loose in her chest that she had held clenched for 11 years, and she turned back to face the box, and she was, for the first time since she was 11 years old, entirely unafraid. "They're gone, Warden," she said, and the address field, which Threll in his panic had forgotten to close, carried it to every tier. "The arithmetic doesn't work anymore. You've got nothing under me to make me climb." She almost smiled. So I'll tell you the thing you never understood, the thing your whole catalog and all your science and 11 years of the goad never once put in the box. You thought I was the leash. You thought if you held me, you held him. She put one hand back into the Blackmane, and the great beast pressed its head into her side, and its amber eyes came up to the box and fixed there, and the furnace sound began, low, felt more than heard, rolling out under the floor of the sunder like the first pressure of a quake. I'm not the leash, Warden. There's no leash. There never was. There's just a friend I fed when he was starving and a friend who never forgot. Her voice did not rise. It did not have to. And you've spent 2 mornings walking me past a cage full of the people I love. And you spent the last minute threatening to hurt children in front of him. She looked up at Vasek Threl, small and brown and entirely without fear, at the lip of his black glass box 200 meters above the sand. In front of him. You built your whole demonstration on making him watch you threaten the ones I love. And now there's nothing left under me, and nothing left on the leash you never had, and only one thing left to happen. The furnace sound rose. Up and down the tiers of the sunder, 40,000 beings felt it in their bones and did not know why they had begun, all at once, to be afraid. You wanted to see the Blackmane aim, Warden, Cora said. You wanted the reach to see what he is. She stepped back and lifted her hand from the mane, and gave the beast the only command she had ever truly given it, the command it had waited 11 years and crossed a galaxy of pain to be given, the small, quiet word that was the opposite of the word she'd said to Vesh in the pen. Go on then, she said softly, go on, Barley. And the Blackmane beast, that the whole galaxy feared, came off the sand. The condemned prisoner on the sand threw up his shackled arms and screamed, and the Blackmane went past him as if he were not there. That was the first thing 40,000 beings understood, in the long-stretched second after the beast came off the sand, that it did not so much as turn its head toward the target Threl had set for it. The whole demonstration, the whole aimed apocalypse, the entire 11-season fantasy of a weapon that killed on command. The beast passed within a body length of the thing it had been ordered to kill and did not break stride, and the target stood there shaking and untouched and forgotten, because the Blackmane had never in its life been a weapon that killed on command, and it was not about to become one now. It had only ever been one thing. It was a friend, and someone had threatened its friend, and it was going to that someone, and nothing in the settled dark was going to be permitted to stand between. It hit the base of the pit wall and went up. A Vashak is built for cold ridges and broken country, the sheer wall of the sunder, that no beast had ever attempted because no beast had ever had a reason, was to the Blackmane only a steeper ridge, and it took it in 3 great surging bounds, black claws finding the seams in the tiered stone, 60 tons of legend going up the face of the arena toward the black glass box that hung out over the sand. The near tiers came apart in panic, Viharn spectators clawing over one another to get back from the rail, the fine and the powerful of the spinward reach reduced in an instant to the oldest animal arithmetic there is, which is that a large predator is coming and you are between it and where it wants to be. In the box, the garrison guard opened fire. Cora, far below on the sand, saw the muzzle flashes stitch across the black shape on the wall, and her heart stopped. And then she saw what 40,000 others saw and would tell for the rest of their lives, that it did not matter. The Blackmane had spent 11 years being hurt by everything the conquered could devise, the goad and the sound lance and the burn prod and worse things the crowds never saw, and it had endured all of it because enduring was all it had. It was not enduring now. It had something worth rising for, and it went up through the fire toward the box without so much as a flinch. And the guards' weapons, that would have dropped any natural thing, only told the near tiers exactly how far past natural the thing on the wall had always been. It reached the box. Prefect Ascendant Gossel, who had governed the spinward reach for longer than the warden beside him had been alive, and who had watched 100 masteries and been impressed by none, watched the black glass wall of the box fill entirely with mane and fang and one enormous amber eye, and the old pale Viharn did a thing he had not done in 60 years of power. He stood, and he moved himself deliberately away from Vasek Threl. He did not run. There was nowhere to run, and he was too old and too proud to try. He simply put the width of the box between himself and the warden, because Gossel had understood, in the instant the beast passed the target on the sand, the one thing the whole demonstration had been meant to prove and had instead disproved forever, that the Blackmane was not aimed and had never been aimed, and was not, at this moment, coming for the conquered, or the reach, or the crowd, or the old prefect who had come to buy it. It was coming for one being in that box. And the wisest thing a governor of the Spinward Reach could do, in the last clean seconds available to him, was make it perfectly, visibly clear to the beast, and to all 40,000 witnesses exactly which being that was. It was the warden, Gossel said to the box, to the address field Threl had never closed, to the whole watching Reach in the flat final voice of a man settling an account. It was always the warden, not the conquered, the warden's spectacle, the warden's arithmetic. The children were the warden's idea. And he moved another careful step away from Vasek Threl and left him alone at the lip of the box with the thing he had spent 11 years pretending he owned. What happened then the display fields did not show, because Sethan, gray, careful, 19 years at the wager lines, who had never once laughed at the wrong time, reached over from the lectern and cut the feed. Later she said she did it to spare the crowd. The truth, which she told no one, was that she did it to spare Threl the last thing he had left, which was to not be watched. It was the only kindness anyone showed Vasek Threl on the last day of his power, and she showed it because she had worked beside him for 19 years and had learned, in that time, the exact and terrible shape of the fear he had spent his whole life trying to sell to everyone else. And she found, at the end, that she could not bear to broadcast it. The box went dark on the display fields. The sound did not. 40,000 beings and one small brown human on the sand heard the black glass give way, and heard briefly, over the open address field, the voice of the most feared warden in the Spinward Reach make a sound that had no arithmetic in it at all. And then the address field cut too, and the sunder was left with nothing but the vast animal silence of a crowd that has watched the thing it feared its whole life turn out to have been afraid, all along, of the wrong monster. Barley. Cora's voice went out across the sand, small and clear into the silence, and 200 meters up in the wreck of the black glass box, the beast went still. Barley enough, she had not moved from where she stood. She stood in the center of the sand with her hands loose and open at her sides and her head high, and she said the word again, the way she had said down in the pen, the way she had said no to save the boy Vesh, the one voice in the settled dark that could reach through 60 tons of 11 years' rage and be obeyed. Enough now, it's done. He can't hurt anyone anymore. Come down. Come back to me. Enough, my good monster. Come home. And the Blackmane beast, that the whole galaxy feared, that had gone up through weapons fire without a flinch, that no goad or garrison or prefect could have turned by a hair's breadth, turned, at the sound of one small human saying enough, and came down the wall of the sunder, 3 great descending bounds, and crossed the sand to her, and lowered its vast black head, and pressed its bloodied brow gently, so gently, against her chest, and stood there trembling while she put her split lie-burned hands into the black mane, and hummed 3 notes of a thrashing song her mother had sung over the winter grain on a world that no longer existed. 40,000 beings watched the hardest thing in the galaxy fold itself down small and quiet at the feet of a piece of frontier stock, and be gentled and go still. And the sound that broke out of the service tiers then, up on the cheap standing decks where the drudge crews and the low garrison and the taken peoples of 100 folded worlds stood watching, was not fear, and it was not a laugh. It started as one voice and became 1,000 and then more, rolling down out of the high cheap tiers into the fine and silent seats below. And it took the prefect ascendant a moment to place the sound, because he had never once heard it in the sunder in all his years. And when he placed it, the old pale Viharn felt something move in his chest that he had penned there so long he had forgotten it had a shape. It was cheering. The smallest things in the machine were cheering, because one of their own had walked out onto the sand and proven the machine wrong. Drius Corin held the carcass shaft until the low bell, and by the low bell there was no longer any reason to hold it, because the order to reseal the docks never came. The old soldier had braced for a fight. He had 2 troopers under his gun and a garrison above him that could, at a word from the box, come down the pen level in force and end the whole thing in blood, children and keepers and beast and all. The word never came. Corin stood in the shaft mouth with his sidearm level and watched the command channel stay silent, and slowly he understood why. There was no one left in the box to give the word. Threll was finished. And the being who governed above Threll, the prefect descendant, had just watched, in front of the entire elite of the Spinward Reach, exactly what came of trying to own the Blackmane, and was, Corin would learn within the hour, an old pragmatist to the marrow, a man who had held power 60 years precisely because he knew the difference between a fight worth having and a fight that only made you smaller. The message came down to Corin not as an order but as a question, relayed through SciFiNarration, who had stepped without fuss into the vacuum the warden left. The prefect descendant wished to know, informally, what the garrison commander recommended regarding the beast and its handler. Corin holstered his sidearm. He told the 2 troopers to stand easy and go find something else to look at. And he sent back up the line, through SciFiNarration, the plainest tactical assessment of his 40-year career. "Recommend the conquered let it go," he said. "All of it. The beast, the girl, the ones with them. Here's the arithmetic the warden never ran, prefect. That animal cannot be held. You watched it go up a 200-meter wall through weapons fire for the one being it loves. There is no cage the Reach can build that holds a thing like that once it has a reason, and now the whole Reach has watched it have a reason. So you've got 2 endings, same as the 2 you offered the warden this morning. Ending 1, you try to keep it. It kills its way off this station within the season, and every soul it kills getting free becomes another verse of the story that's already going around your service tiers. The story where the smallest thing in the machine brought the biggest thing in the machine to heel. That's the ending where the conquered looks weak and cruel and loses, slowly, in front of everyone. Ending 2. You let a small brown farm girl walk it quietly off your station and out past your catalog to some cold nothing world nobody wants, and it's gone, and the story ends warm, and every drudge in the Reach who cheered just now goes home believing the conquered, in the end, knew when to be merciful. Corin let that sit. One of those endings costs you a legend and buys you a mercy you can take credit for. The other costs you the legend anyway, plus a great many prefects, plus the fear that's the only thing your sunder ever really sold. You're an old man who's governed 60 years, prefect. You already know which ending you're picking. I'm just the one saying it out loud so you don't have to. The answer came back within the quarter hour. The beast and its handler and the human stock accompanying them were, by order of the prefect descendant, remanded to the frontier under a decree of removal, a conquered formality that meant, in plain speech, taken off the books and told never to come back. A single unregistered short-haul frigate, of the kind the Sunder used to ship beast carcasses to the reclamation yards, was found to have developed a docking fault that would keep it off the manifest for 1 quarter-day. Nobody looked at it. Drius Corin, garrison commander, personally logged the oversight and personally lost it, one last time. They went down to the frigate dock through the carcass shafts, the small brown human and the great black beast walking side by side, and at the bottom of the shaft the children were waiting, and the 6-year-old girl let go of old Aldous' hand and ran the last of the way and stopped, suddenly shy, in front of the Blackmane. "Is this him?" she asked Cora, "the one you found when he was little?" "This is him," Cora said. The child looked up, and up, at 60 tons of legend at the black mane and the fangs as long as her arm and the amber eyes, and she was not afraid, because she was 6 and she had been told a true thing about the world by someone she trusted, which is the only armor that ever really works. "He's very big now," she said gravely. "He grew," Cora agreed, and something cracked and warmed in her voice. I couldn't take him up the ridge when I meant to, so he grew. That's all right. Grew, and I came back for him, and now we're all going somewhere with a sky. She crouched down beside the child, at her eye level, beside the vast lowered head of the beast, and she said quiet to the little one and to old Aldous behind her, and to the woman Perrin and the boy Vesh and gaunt keeper Oru and Drius Corin, who had come down to the dock himself to see the last of it. There's a place my father used to talk about. Off the catalogue. Too poor and too far and too small for anyone to want. Cold enough for him, open enough for him, nobody counting. She put her hand on the black brow. It won't be Elspie's Rest, but it'll have a sky and a ridge and room to be what you are, and no one will ever come to acquire you again. I promise. I've never broken a promise to you yet, and I'm not starting on the last one. Gaunt Keeper Oru put his old scarred hand flat against the frigate's hull and looked at the small human and the great beast and the huddle of freed stock, and 40 years of his trade fell away for the last time, and he found he still did not miss it. You'll want a keeper, he said gruffly. On a cold nothing world with a Vashak the size of a grain hauler and a pack of soft things to keep alive. You'll want two. He nodded at Vesh, who stood white and wondering and utterly changed beside him. The boy's no good to the conquered anymore. He's seen the fourth thing, and I'm too old to want anything the Reach is selling. He almost smiled. Somebody has to teach the children which end of a Vashak is which. Might as well be the two keepers in the galaxy, who finally learned there's no trick to it. Drius Corin did not go with them. He had a garrison and 40 years of habit and a place in the machine he was too old to leave, and someone, he said, had to stay behind and lose the paperwork and keep the story going around the service tiers the way stories needed keeping, the true one, about the smallest thing in the machine and the biggest, and the day the Reach learned which of them to fear. He gripped Cora's forearm, soldier to soldier, over the stock brand that no longer meant anything. Go on then, the old soldier said, and it was almost the human's own word, and he knew it, and he meant it that way. Go on. Take your monster home. The unlisted world had no name, because no one had ever bothered to give it one, and that was the first thing Cora loved about it. It hung at the cold, ragged edge of the settled dark, past the last of the conquered's catalog buoys, a small, hard world of long winters and open range, and a sky at night so thick with unclaimed stars that old Aldous stood out in the first evening's cold and wept, quietly, the way a man weeps who has not seen an unowned sky in a very long time. There was a valley with water in it, and cold enough and cover, and a long gray ridge that ran up out of the valley into higher country, where the winters were harder and the range was empty, and a thing built for cold ridges and broken country could be, at last, exactly what it was. They built the homestead low in the valley, the two keepers and the freed stock and the children, out of the frigate's hull plate and the valley's own stone, and it was poor and small and far from everything, and it was, Cora thought, standing in the doorway of it on the first true morning with her hands wrapped around a cup of something hot, the richest place she had ever stood. The children ran wild in the cold. Aldous found he still knew, in his old hands, which reclamation craft turned to gentler uses on a frontier, how to read a sky for weather, how to coax a hard ground to feed you. Vesh, who had come into the trade because he loved animals and had nearly died learning what that meant, turned out to have the makings of a fine frontier keeper, now that there was nothing left to keep but the keeping itself. And on the morning the long first winter finally broke, Cora walked the Blackmane up the ridge. She had waited for it. She had known, the way she had always known, that the homestead in the valley was for the soft things, for the children and the old man and the keepers, but the ridge and the high country and the empty range beyond were for him. That a Vashak was not a thing you kept in a barn, that her father had been right 11 years and a whole life ago. That the last and hardest and best thing she could do for the friend she had crossed a galaxy to find was the thing she had been getting ready to do at 13, before the frigate came down out of the winter sky and took the choice away. So on the morning the winter broke she walked him up out of the valley, the small brown woman and the great black beast, side by side, up the long gray ridge into the high cold country, until the homestead was a low dark line far below, and there was nothing ahead but open range and unclaimed sky. At the top of the ridge she stopped, and put her hands one last time into the Blackmane, and pressed her forehead to his brow, and hummed 3 notes of her mother's thrashing song, and the great beast went soft under her hands the way it had gone soft in a cold barn when the world was young. "This is the part I couldn't do before," she told him, quiet into the mane, into the cold, clean wind coming down off the high country. "This is the part they stole. So we're going to do it now, and we're going to do it right." She stepped back and lifted her hands away, and her eyes were wet and her voice was steady, which is the only way the hardest things ever get said. "You're not a weapon, and you're not a legend, and you're not the hardest thing in the galaxy. You never were. You're a Vashak off the high ridge above a barn, and it's time you went and were one." She smiled at him, the small, plain, brown human who had never once been afraid of him, from the dying cub in the fodder to the 60 tons of legend on the sand. "Go on then, Barley. Go be what you are. The valley's right there when you want it. It'll always be right there. But the ridge is yours." She said the last of it barely above the wind, the oldest and truest thing she had, the thing 11 years and a whole ruined life had been carrying up this ridge to say. "Go on, my good monster, I found you. I brought you home. Now go." For a long moment the Blackmane stood and looked at her with its amber eyes, the eyes she had fallen asleep looking into on the coldest nights of a childhood that had ended 11 years and a galaxy ago. Then it turned slow and went up the last of the ridge into the high cold country, unhurried, filling the whole of the empty range with the certainty that it owned every meter of it. And at the crest, where the range fell away into unclaimed distance, it stopped and turned its great black head and looked back down the ridge at the small brown human one last time. And then it was gone over the crest, into the country that had no name and no catalog and no one counting, to be, at last, exactly what it was. Cora stood on the ridge a long while after in the cold, clean wind, and she was not sad, though her face was wet, because sad was the wrong word and she had learned on a hard road to use the right ones. Down in the valley the smoke rose from the low stone homestead, and the children's voices came thin and bright up the cold air, and somewhere in the high country above her, a thing built for ridges was learning to be free. She had done the thing she came to do. She had done all of it. And that night, and every night after, when the winter cold came down hard off the high country and the wind found the seams of the low stone house, the small brown woman who had once been the property of the Sunder concession would step out into the dark and look up the long gray ridge, and hum 3 notes of an old thrashing song into the wind. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, from somewhere up in the empty cold above the valley, a great black shape would answer, and pace the ridgeline once against the unclaimed stars, and be still, keeping its watch over the sleeping valley, the way it had kept watch over one warm barn in a cold winter long ago. The galaxy went on fearing the Blackmane beast. The story of it spread through the settled dark for years, the way such stories do, the terror that no cage could hold, the legend that killed 9 keepers and went up a wall through weapons fire, the hardest thing in the galaxy. The galaxy never did learn the rest of it. The galaxy never learned about the barn, or the stolen milk, or the thrashing song, or the small brown farm girl who had knelt in the fodder in front of a dying thing, and simply, stubbornly, refused to be afraid. The galaxy kept its monster, because a galaxy needs its monsters, and it never once suspected the truth that a handful of frontier drudges on a nameless cold world carried quietly in their hearts for the rest of their long free lives. That it was never the beast the galaxy should have feared. It was only ever what he would do to keep her warm.